Good afternoon. The policy work session and board workshop is now in session. Mr. Gibbs, roll call, please.
Ms. Telford,
Present.
Mr. Susan, Ms. McDougall,
Present.
Ms. Campbell,
Present.
Ms. Jenkins.
Present.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag, United States of America. Public. Indivisible.
All right, our first order of business today is to hold a policy work session for Policy 5350, Student Suicide Awareness and Prevention. This will be the board's opportunity to provide suggested revisions and direction prior to the rule development. Chris Moore, Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, will provide us the executive summary, followed by board discussion.
House Bill 945, requiring crisis response services through a mobile response team. And this has been added to the revision to include the following. Number 1, de-escalation strategies, suicide risk inventory consultant role, the mobile response team, and the mobile response team involvement. These proposed revisions encompass the suggested language from Neola. This is unusual because there's so much background and so much changing in this policy based on statute language and time. So a lot of these statute language changes started 2 years ago without a lot of direction. And so we've put pieces and parts in place. And as time has gone by, the state has caught up with recommendations on some pieces of it and not on others, and there are still other pieces that are still out there hanging. So just for clarification purposes, I know we're in a work session and you guys will have questions. We gave you a folder, and I want to thank Dr. Paula Lewis and Dr. Jana Jenkins in the back. They are working through this and have been working through this for probably the past 2 years, trying to not only keep us in line with requirements, but really keep us ahead and do what's right in the name of our students and our community. So in the packet, what they did is they put together the state action or need identified, and then our response is on one sheet. I know we don't have time to read all of this today. I don't expect you, but I wanted to get it in your hands so if you had any questions as we move forward, we could answer them. Part of what the recommendation is for a suicide prevention school is that we use a specific screener, and we're using the school version of the screener. The state wants us to use the larger, longer version of the screener. So we're in consultation with the state right now. There are 3 other same-size districts that are using the same screener we use. So I wanted to give you a comparison between the 2 screeners so that you can see what we're using and why. I wanted to give you a timeline for suicide prevention certified schools because, of course, that came out without direction. We put pieces in place. Direction has come out now, and so I'm just trying to let you know where we are and to catch you up on that. And then we gave you a copy of the 2 rating scales, followed by, I believe, a copy of our suicide risk inventory assessment for December, so you could kind of see how all those pieces play together. The actual policy just has one change. It changes the in-service from 2.5 hours to 2 hours. Most of the changes are in the procedures attached to the policy. So that being said, any questions or suggestions or recommendations? I know you're probably going to need time to digest everything I just put in front of you.
Any board member have any questions, Ms. Moore, at this point? Ms. Campbell?
Just one quick one on the turned on the SRI data. It says December. That is up year to date through December for this school year, or is that just monthly?
I'm going to turn back to Paula because she keeps track of that for us. Is that year to date or is that just December? It's just December. We send out we do a board update every single month. We can do a first semester year-to-date for you guys if you'd like to see that, and then we can do one at the end of the year. Or I can ask Paula if she can just add on a year-to-date at the bottom of that, but she puts that together for us every single month so you guys have an idea of how many suicide risk inventories we're doing, who's doing them, what are the outcomes, at what ages, so that you can kind of get a feel for what's going on in the district.
Thank
Any other board members have questions? Okay, then I guess we will digest and
Yep.
have some additional discussion at our next policy review.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Ms. Moore. Okay. Now we will move on to the workshop portion of our meeting. First, Robin Novelli, Chief Operating Officer, will provide us with a strategic plan update. Mr. Novelli? And as you're approaching, Mr. Novelli, I just have to tell you how very much I love our strategic focus wall decor back there.
Ah, okay, great. Well, you know, as I get started here on that note, Ms. Belford, I want to recognize Cynthia Rayan sitting in the back of the room here, and she didn't want me to recognize her, but I have to anyway. She's our project manager, and I just want to give a great shout out to her. She keeps the strategic plan ever in front of all of us, and there's not a day that goes by she's not working on some aspect of the plan. And these banners were her vision. She got together with some of Russ Brune's individuals in his department, and they helped her with some of the artwork, and she was able to put that together, along with, you may have noticed, the rolling video in the front lobby on a computer screen there, and Russ's folks helped her to design that video. I understand that's also being played during some of the commercial breaks during the board meetings. And so big shout out to GCR. Thank you for all your help and assistance, Cynthia. We also want to thank Russ Cheatham's folks that are working with Cynthia behind the scenes on a SharePoint software. You know, we have over 50 cooks in this kitchen that are putting together the strategic plan and changing documents and keeping things updated, providing evidence, providing metrics, and having a piece of software that can handle all that is very advantageous. So that's been a real improvement in the plan this last year or so. So thanks to Russ and his folks on that. Really have to just give a shout out to all of the cabinet members and their directors. We had this align and optimize workshop in December where all the directors came together and then broke off and worked on different goals and different objectives, different strategies throughout that morning of that day. We're going to go over some of their work here today, but folks have really rolled up their sleeves, gotten to work, and have provided some great modifications mid-year through this academic school year on the street. I can't talk quick times. Started. All right. So, board members have had both a hard copy of this document since early last week. You also have it as part of the workshop agenda today. But we're going to take a look at the strategic plan, specifically the mid-year process of aligning and revising the plan in the middle of the year without making too many changes, but changes that are necessary to see us through. And had an opportunity earlier to talk with Marilyn. She was up here at the podium this morning right after I had put this on the computer. She was putting her documents on the computer, and she's going to speak along, I assume, with Janet and Lena a little later about the accreditation that's coming up next week. And I couldn't help notice that her second or third slide looked very similar to this slide, and we didn't work together on that. And that's really some good news. We'd actually produced this idea before we even started thinking about accreditation several months ago in terms of what the strategic plan's annual cycle of continuous improvement should look like. How do we keep the strategic plan ever before us and keep it dynamic, keep it moving? And so we have this strategic plan annual schedule, and it includes, as you know, there are 8 different progress reports throughout the year, 2 for each goal. We have the mid-year Align and Optimize meeting that I was just speaking of, that have all the directors and cabinet members come together in the middle of the year. We're going to have a year-end review and revision in June. And, of course, board workshops now and again in July. And then as substantial changes are made on a yearly basis, the superintendent will then do a presentation at a regularly held school board meeting, and we'll post the plan as it is modified on a yearly basis. But we also are making some modifications right now in the mid-year time, and that's what this workshop is all about. By the way, as you know, as I was designing this PowerPoint and starting to look at some of the preparation documents for the accreditation, I thought that it might be helpful. Some of the things in this PowerPoint I think might be a good cheat sheet for all of us to use when these subjects and questions come up next week. We're having to answer some questions about the strategic plan. So just at a glance here, during the fall, because we had gotten a little behind with the strategic plan, from March to August, we were a little preoccupied with something new in our lives called a global pandemic that we'd never faced before, and so we wanted to catch up, and so we provided the board champions opportunity to have some designated time to sit down with those cabinet members that are the accountable members for different parts of the goals, and those things happened during the fall. Since then, Ms. Jenkins has become a board member, and she's working closely with Beth Fetty. I understand that you have appointments with Beth Fetty regularly, about every other week. And Ms. Jenkins now, of course, is our board champion for exceptional workforce. Dr. Fetty is accountable for that particular goal. So we also had 4 progress reports this fall, 1 for each goal, and of course the mid-year Align and Optimize meeting and this board workshop. So here again, we have those beautiful banners that keep in front of us these 4 goals. And I think it's important, especially as we talk with those folks from Cognia next week, but also as we're talking with each other and working together on the strategic plan, that nomenclature is very important. We use words in the strategic plan that we use every day in conversation, but it's important that we come to consensus on what we mean by those words when we're speaking about the strategic plan. And so I want to go over and highlight some of those things, make sure that we're all speaking the same nomenclature next week when we're talking with folks from Cognia. So goals, as you know, we have 4 goals: academic excellence, exceptional workforce, community connection, and operational sustainability. And goals in the strategic plan are measured with what we call benchmarks. And of course, as a school system, our thrust is on student achievement. And we have probably thousands of different types of measurements that we could use for student achievement. But the big 5, if you will, that we feel really are benchmarks along the way to see if we're being successful are these 5. We have kindergarten readiness. We have Algebra 1 success, 3rd grade literacy, graduation rate, and college and career acceleration. So our goals, our strategic plan is measured by these benchmarks. And along the way, we want to take a look at those benchmarks when we can. Now, during the mid-year, sometimes that's a little bit difficult. We were able to find some alternative benchmarks because of some of the peculiar situations that we find ourselves in this particular year. The kindergarten readiness benchmark is the Flickers percentage of ready. And unfortunately, I've been nagging Jane there back and forth, but we don't have the 1920 data for that, but we do have listed here the Flickers data from the previous. 3rd grade literacy, the way we said that we would measure that as our benchmark was the percent of students passing the 3rd grade FSA ELA exam. Now, unfortunately, we didn't have that data from the 1920 school year. So what we did was we took a look at the iReady district data to give ourselves some type of a benchmark there for 3rd grade literacy at this point. And the nice thing about the iReady district data is that we have iReady data for this current school year that we're currently in. And you can see that that's pulled back up to a 60 percentile. In terms of Algebra 1 success, we said that we'd measure ourselves by the percentage of students finishing middle school who passed the Algebra 1 course and passed the EOC. We didn't have the EOC to look at from last spring, but we do have some data specific to the percentage of 8th graders who are finishing an Algebra 1 course and getting the Algebra 1 credit. And those numbers are amazing. When you look to see that between school year 18 and 19, we went up 5%, and then this last year, we went up another 10 percentage points. So that benchmark is really moving up. In terms of graduation rate, we just got our official graduation rate about 2 weeks ago, and we know that that number has gone up, highest in the history of the county. I do have an asterisk next to that data, and because there were some COVID waivers involved in that, but Dr. Sullivan assures us that those numbers are up in spite of that, so have that to celebrate. In the College and Career Acceleration benchmark, we don't have that data specifically from the state in terms of the percentage of students. The way the state measures it for the report card is that they look at the percentage of graduates who earned at least one of the following possibilities. They could have taken an advanced placement class and passed it, or an ACE, or a Cambridge, that's the same thing, or an IB, or an industry certification, or a college dual enrollment course. And so we don't have those specifics, but we do have some other data that is closely related to that. We took a look at the advanced placement pass rate, and you can see in 2020 that that's up, and it was up the year before. We went 50, almost 58, 59 to 61%. And graduating seniors with an industry certification, this has been talked about at board meetings before, but we can see that that is moving up as well, and a full 10% percentage points there, 37 to 47% of our graduating seniors with an industry certification. In addition to that, our accelerated types of diplomas, AP Capstone, IB, and ACE are all up from 2018 and 2019. So these are very much related to that particular benchmark, and they're moving in the right direction. Now, the cornerstone of these 5 benchmarks we see as being the social emotional wellness. And we say that that is the foundation on which children develop and learn. It is the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. And so each of our 5 benchmarks are really dependent on our cornerstone. And we have some data related to that. We made some minor adjustments in this area also during this mid-year process. Our good friends at Student Services wanted me to remind you that this 81% is of schools surveyed, and not necessarily of all schools, but of the schools surveyed, the 81% are currently implementing directly explicit social emotional learning. Their goal is to show evidence that 100% of our schools are doing that. So they're working that direction. All right, so we talked about goals are measured by benchmarks. Objectives. In the strategic plan, objectives are what we're going to do to reach a goal. In this particular example, I have our very first objective of our first goal. First goal being academic excellence. And the first objective of the first goal is to ensure that every student has daily engagement with complex, grade-appropriate curriculum. And I picked that particular one not only because it was the first one in the plan, but because we're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit more later on in the presentation. Objectives are then measured by, in the strategic plan, our nomenclature is performance indicators. So performance indicators are how we're measuring objectives. And I happen to have the performance indicator for this particular objective as our example here on the screen. And then Under objectives, we have strategies. Strategies are how we're going to accomplish our objectives. So strategies serve objectives kind of in the same way objectives serve goals. This happens to be the first strategy of that first objective of the first goal. And strategies are measured by metrics. So in our nomenclature, again, that goals are measured by benchmarks, objectives are measured by performance indicators, strategies are measured by metrics. If we all have that same nomenclature, we're talking about the strategic plan, then we can communicate much better. So during the mid-year Align and Optimize meeting that we held in December, with all the cabinet members and all their directors and some other individuals under their different departments, we said that we don't want to necessarily change horses midstream, but we do want to do what we can to get them across. And so we need to make some minor adjustments at least. And 3 questions that I posed to our group that day, December 11th, were these 3 here. Are our strategies advancing our objectives? And strategies are what we use to make sure we accomplish our objectives. So we wanted to take a look at those strategies and make sure that they were well worded. We wanted to look at those strategies to see if maybe they were already complete. We wanted to look at those strategies to say if maybe they weren't working and they need to be changed. And we also wanted to look at the metrics that are supposed to measure the strategy. If they're not a good metric for measuring that strategy, maybe those really wanted to take a look at our metrics and our strategy. And then the next thing we want to do, we asked the question, do our performance indicators measure the success of our objectives? And we reminded those folks present that in June, we're going to have a report out on performance indicators. And we're going to see how we're doing in that area. And so if the performance indicators aren't a good measurement of our objectives, this is the time to modify that and change those things. And then we also asked what budget implications were identified during the progress reports or since we wanted to provide the board with information about budget implications, that if we're going to move forward on the strategic plan the way it's written, we're going to have to think about some budget items there and how it will affect us on our ability to accomplish what we're going to do and make sure that we've budgeted appropriately. Now, in spite of that, there were a couple exceptions to the rule where a couple of folks actually changed courses midstream, but there was good reason for that. One, I'll say that Russ Brune, after his progress report, or before his progress report, as he was preparing, really made a lot of modifications in his area of community connection. And that makes sense because he's new on the job and he has his own strategic plan for his department. And he wanted this strategic plan to reflect that. And so he made some major changes there. Another place where you will see major changes is in academic excellence in the 4th objective, A4. And that's a result of our new director of equity and help me out.
Diversity.
And diversity, thank you. Equity and diversity, Dr. Danielle McKinnon, who's worked very closely with Dr. Sullivan. As a matter of fact, Ms. Belford had some input in that process as well to take a look at objective A4 and make some modifications there. So we did change a couple of horses midstream here. You have also this red line version, and rather than me reading through line by line the entire thing, I can open that up well here on the screen, but if there are particular areas that you would like to comment on or ask questions about, or if there's something that you'd like to discuss within some of the revisions, the nice thing about this particular document is that if you go to the table of contents, you click right to a particular area. So if there's anything the board would like to discuss, red line version. Right now you'll see draft written across it because we want to go through this workshop with you folks first. And then if we are solid on that for this point of this year, we'll take draft off of that and we'll say that this is our mid-year alignment for this year.
Does any board member have anything that we should discuss from the red line version? I will just say thank you to Dr. Sullivan and Jane Klein for working through those changes on academic excellence. and also to Russ for his work on the community connection. I think that those were all very positive changes that were made to the plan, and I think it's going to drive us to do the work that we really need to do, so thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your participation in that.
Yeah.
I'd gone through and had a little smiley face, something to be excited for under each one. But one of the ones that I was really excited about was under our what is the exceptional workforce, was the wellness program, the emphasis on the wellness programs moving forward. I'm really excited as a member of SIAC, and also to see it in the strategic plan about that change. And then tonight we'll have the opportunity to vote on our new consultant, that seems like a lot of that direction is also headed in the same direction. I think that's a big piece that is going to be exciting moving forward for our employees. So thank you.
Good, Mr.
All
Kelly.
right. Well, turning back then to the PowerPoint. As I said earlier, we also asked department directors working with their cabinet members to supply us with possible budget implications beyond what we already had identified during the progress reports throughout the fall. And I have a list of a number of those things, and if there are any specific one that you'd like to talk about, we can. But one I really want to highlight, I know is, I had discussions with Dr. Mullins about this. I've talked in great depth with Jane Klein and Dr. Stephanie Sullivan about this very first one. And if there's anyone, in my opinion, that perhaps worthy of some discussion with the board during this workshop, that might be the one. We did ask cabinet members to give some specifics on how many dollars they might need for some of these budget implications, and you'll see that they gave good ballpark figures for most of these categories. In this particular category, and I pressed hard, but I was convinced that because of the dynamics of this situation, that's just impossible. We do know that it could be several $1 million. Basically, in a nutshell, my understanding, and Jane and Stephanie can correct me if I make a mistake here, but the state gives us some categorical money in this area. And at this current time, we're under the adoption for ELA and ILA, English Language Arts, Intensive Language Arts, for next year. And in order to have the type of quality instructional materials in the hands of our teachers, in the hands of our students, that make sure that students have quality, grade appropriate, complex text in their hands daily, as that first objective talks about, that's not a cheap endeavor. It is quite expensive to do that well. And having come from that division in my previous position, I know very well that we've had to scrimp and cut corners in that area for many, many years. The amount of money that the state gives us for that is not going to be sufficient to do this kind of excellence that we need to do it with. And the problem that really kind of doubles that problem is that the math adoption is the very next year. And so this time next year, we'll be in that process for math. And those two are the most expensive to do and to do right. They're also probably some of the most essential in terms of the kinds of benchmarks, performance standards that we're looking at for students to accomplish. And so will we be able to supplement from our district budget what the state provides us in order to do this with excellence? And I think that's worthy of some discussion.
So, Dr. Sullivan, you can just give me a nod, or Jane, if I'm correct, but my understanding is that the new instructional materials that are coming out aligned with best standards are approximately 3 to 4 times more expensive than our previous instructional materials. Is that in ballpark? Got it. Okay. Yeah. So one of the, I know Dr. Mullins and I had some discussion about this. We had a Friday live call last week with Jacob Oliva. And one of the things that came up in the call was the cost of these new adoptions. Barbara Jenkins from Orange County was indicating that they were looking at, I think, $86 million for the adoption for Orange County, and had shared that with the chancellor, prior to this meeting. One of the things that came up in that meeting was that the chancellor indicated that they were working on flexibility in the new ESSER funds to allow us to utilize those dollars for adoption. I tried to clarify, does that mean that you all are going to take the money that you get at the state level and increase the categorical for our adoption? And as you probably can guess, that wasn't the indication. What they were saying was that they would allow us at the district level, hopefully, to utilize our district allocation for adoption. But I don't know how feasible that is to address our issue either, especially because we do have math the following year, and then I believe social studies the year after that. So I don't know if that's going to help us at all.
Well, we're certainly keeping it on our radar. We have yet to get the first indication from the Florida DOE of what our ESSER number 2 funds will look like. There's been no communication as of yet. So we're, that's the reason we're accumulating these budget implications, because we'll be faced with, priorities and identifying them. And we've had conversations. I would, having gone through the list of implications, I would suggest that our textbook adoption commitment is essentially at the highest on the list, because we know we're going to be faced with compounded slide with our students moving forward. This is the opportunity for us to, in the most cohesive manner and opportunity, align ELA and our ILA and push district-wide all-teacher professional development training and really establish the foundation on these new materials. One, because we got the new standards, but number two, we have great confidence in their alignment to the standards. So we've not approached textbook adoption with the same level of rigor and competence as we have in the past. So we're going to be working very hard to ensure that we can establish this as the real push forward for our kids. So we'll be having more conversation. It's hard for me to suggest at this moment what ESSER is going to look like yet. There's been lots of projections and speculations, and typically a few days, if not a week, goes by that someone doesn't say, well, what are you going to do with X millions of dollars? I don't know yet, because I don't know what the X is, and we don't know what all of the priorities and the needs are going to be to sustain what we need to for our students to work through some of the challenges that we've had this year as we move forward. So not surprised to hear the state suggest that they're looking for that level of flexibility, but I'm optimistic, I'll say, that the ESSER funds would be permitted to be used for textbook adoption, but I'd be even elated if the state were to suggest they were going to increase the categorical. But we're going to plan for Plan B, nevertheless.
So one of the things that we have been discussing in the advocacy committee with FSBA and legislative committee as well is the importance of districts in general reaching out to their local delegation and helping them to really understand the challenges that we have been facing at the local level, especially with there is some perception that we have gotten all of these dollars and we haven't spent them, and that maybe we don't need the money as much as we truly do need the money. And so I think that's a great point of conversation with our local delegation so they can have educated conversations as they're moving into committee weeks and lots of those discussions. I know several of the superintendents were at the Senate Appropriation Committee meeting last week and spoke about some of that. But we probably need to make sure that everyone's on the same page on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll follow up with Mr. Brune as we continue our conversations and reaching out to our local delegates and make sure they understand not just the problem at large, but we'll define it right down to regard to what it means to our kids.
Perfect. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Novelli, I didn't mean to get us way off on a tangent there, but
And if there are any other budget implications that you see on this page or the following 2 pages, we have some for exceptional workforce and a few in operational sustainability. If there are any others that you'd like to discuss, do that now.
Mr. Novelli,
Yes, ma'am.
for these budget implications, are all of these in addition to, like, this is extra,
The ones that I
an
have-
increases? I mean, because I do know we do have a certain money amount that we set aside every year for new bus purchases, for example. How far off is this this is the amount in addition to what we're already budgeting every year?
So in that specific case, this is actually a little bit more than what we've traditionally been doing. So the answer is yes and no. Some of these things are things that have to continue to recur, and we had been doing it. And so in this particular example that you brought up, we've usually been able to do around 21 to 23 buses a year. Really, to reach our goal, I've calculated that we need to do about 30 buses a year in order to reach that goal in 5 years, which includes adding new buses. The existing buses, of course, age by 5 years in 5 years also, and then taking off buses, which we're really stressing now, that really don't need to be part of our fleet anymore because they're just too maintenance intensive. So it's a little bit of an increase in that particular one over what we've been doing.
So the $3.3 million, is that in addition? Is that the addition, or is that the total?
That's the total.
Okay.
Yeah, and that normally comes out of a capital fund.
Right. I just off the top of my head, I couldn't remember what
Yeah.
that line item is usually year.
It changes and varies from year to year depending on what we have available in capital funds and how much I have to share that with some of my partners over here, Sue and Russ Cheatham. And so there's some give and take in those discussions. But usually it's been in the low 20s. If we were going to be serious about reaching this particular objective in 5 years, it would take 30 buses a year.
Mr. Novelli, on the FMIS system,
Yes, ma'am.
that was something that we had begun to embark upon and then
We
pulled
did.
back because we didn't have capacity for
Yes, ma'am.
rollout. So is this amount over and above?
This would be starting over again. We
Okay.
got to the place last year where we had gone through the procurement process and we were ready to award that. With the situation with this pandemic that we faced at the time that it came time to pull the trigger on that, not knowing where we were financially and not having full confidence that we could implement with fidelity, when Dr. Mullins asked the cabinet for things that we might be able to provide at that time, we let go of that particular option. So if we want to go back to having a fleet management information system, we would need to build that into the transportation budget during this springtime budget for next school year, and we would start that process over again. If we want to go that direction, that's what the price tag would be. It takes $300,000 to get it started and $50,000 yearly after that.
And on the GPS system,
Yes.
since that's a security issue, is
Yes,
that
ma'am.
something that could potentially be addressed with sales surtax?
You know, that's a great question. We ran into that problem with the FMIS last year. We had been set aside capital funds to do the FMIS, and at the last minute found that we couldn't use capital funds for that. It had to be operational dollars. So I'm looking back at Sue. I don't know if she would have any idea in that realm or not, but that's something we could investigate on. Definite maybe? All right. We've got a definite maybe back there.
Perfect.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Just to provide further clarification on the, Mr. Novelli, the FMIS, the 300,000 is for the purchase of the software. The 50,000 is for the maintenance that would be necessary to maintain that software from year to year, correct?
That's correct.
That's not personnel, but that's for the actual
No.
software.
Yeah, that's correct. Thank you.
I wanted to say thank you, Dr. Novelli, for that. I wanted to say one of the things that we run into is every year, because we don't have that system in place, we have, I know what you're just giggled about, was it the, anyways. The bottom line is that we have individuals that work down at the bus center, and they're trying to figure it all out. So the soft cost that we don't really see, that we pay for individuals to do that, is significant in the fact of not only are we spending time trying to route, trying to set it all up, cost of transportation with gasoline and the wear and tear on our buses and all of those soft costs that are out there that we replace when we have a system like this. So I really appreciate you bringing this stuff forward, and I really appreciate it. And I think when you look at the GPS that we look at for location of the buses for safety, if there's anything that falls into it, I mean, how many times have we had a student jump on the wrong bus, and how many times there's a lot of applications there that I think we might be able to hold. So I want to say thank you, and also I think that the individuals that are at the bus compounds and everything else would be happy to have the system so that they're not forced to make decisions that may not be correct just based on what their knowledge is. And I think that's good efficiency for our district. So thank you.
So are you going to be bringing forward recommendations, Dr. Mullins, for us to be able to figure out how to do these things? Are we modifying our goals? What's the game
Well,
plan?
we're just beginning to get into the budget prioritization process. As the board knows, we have a budget priority workshop next month. So we'll be incorporating some of these as we move forward, making some recommendations. Of course, if we aren't able to commit to some of the implications, we'll have to modify the strategic plan, or whether it's a timeline or what the expectations are and that sort of thing. This is really just to, we've not ever done this before. So, but as we were having discussions as cabinet and in the optimize and align workshop, we realized we've got to be realistic in the expectations of being able to make progress forward, and don't want to get to the end of the year and say, oh, we couldn't do that because there was no money, when we should have been talking about there's no money 12 months, 18 months previously. So I can't speculate at this point that we're going to be able to address all of the budget implications. That'll be a process as we work forward, prioritizing them, getting board input or feedback on, where do we want to readjust and align them, moving forward, knowing that any non-funding of any one of those things could inhibit reaching our ultimate goal within the strategic plan. So yes, so it'll begin next month in February as we move forward, and then we'll work it out as we progress through legislative session and know better what our district budget will be going into next year. Some of it may be we're going to put it off for a year, we're going to delay it, that sort of thing. Other one-time cost things, we may say, okay, if we have X one-time dollars at the end of the year, we're going to allocate or earmark those towards whatever those priorities are. So we'll start that next month, and then it'll continue on through, I believe, our next budget workshop is in April.
Super, thank you. Any other board members have any additional questions, comments?
On budget implications or on anything?
I would suggest budget implications, and then we can kind of do a wrap-up. I think we have one more slide.
I just want to say thanks to our board champions, and we have those board champions identified here on this slide, and we thank you for continuing to provide your input. You represent your constituents. That's one of the ways that we connect to what the folks in our schools, our parents, our teachers, our stakeholders out in the community. So we encourage you to continue to collaborate with cabinet members as we continue to modify this dynamic strategic plan. Also wanted to point out that the strategic plan is located right on our website. Thanks again to GCR for maintaining that for us. We'll go in and make this, the changes are already representative here live on the website. We'll take the word draft out of there for now. We have the objective profiles on the website. We have the brochure that's 12 pages long that's provided as an outward-facing document for our community. We also have a one-page trifold that still has a couple of things that need to be tweaked on that. We'll do that in the next day or so, and those will be live, ready for prime time. And for anybody who happens to be watching at home, the way to get there, if you're at our district website, the main page, you simply hit About Us. Click on that at the bottom here, right above there. It says Superintendent. Second from the bottom, Strategic Plan. You click on that and you're there. So thank you very much, and you have a good day.
Thank you, Mr. Novelli. Any board members have general feedback, questions, comments?
I do, and I'm sorry, one of these, a couple of these I should have brought up a little while ago, and I didn't have my notes right in front of me. I'm going to move from little to big. On page 37 in the strategic plan where it talks about the transportation, one of the things I was really excited about this year especially is the bus bulletin that and I know we started that. I don't know if it's completely rolled out, but can we add to that communication with our students, just as a parent of a bus rider? You know, if it's a matter of text notifications going out to parents saying, hey, your child's bus is, I mean, when our students get into high school, middle school, I think it would be good for them to be able to sign up just as easily as a parent, so they know, hey, I'm staying at the bus stop, but the bus is not going to be here for 15 minutes. But if we can add them into that communication, I think that would be really helpful.
Very good. Thank you.
On the cornerstone, the mental health, the 81%, I know that we have we've been working on mental health strategies and programs, across the board. When you say 81% is implementing explicit, we've talked about so many different programs. I'm not really sure which ones we're talking about specifically for that that number. So can you give us some examples of what those specific, direct, explicit social emotional learning programs are? Are we talking about PBIS or CHAMPS, those kinds of things? Like I said, I know all of our schools are doing something, but what does that qualify to get in that 81% that we're working towards 100? Thanks, Chris.
So the 81% actually represents the schools who wrote back to us about specific programs. All schools have been trained in trauma-informed. All elementary schools are doing conscious discipline, which is part of our overall plan for social-emotional learning. The schools that wrote back are talking about specific social-emotional programs. In elementary school, I don't want to mess this up, but in elementary school, secondary, it's Lion's Quest, and in elementary school, it is out of my head. I am so sorry. But those are the schools that responded back that they were using those specific programs for SEL. So I can't give you.
I know every school is doing it a little differently. So if a school has, is putting that on their, an elementary school, for example, on their activity wheel, they do music, art, PE, and, would that be
I don't know that any school is actually doing it on their activity wheel. That would require another teacher unless their school counselor was part of that
Right.
activity
That's,
wheel. In
I
which
know
case it
Meadow
could
Lane had
happen.
done that at one time.
The vast majority of our elementary schools are doing it in morning circle because that's
Okay.
part of their just flow of their day. Secondary schools, it's a little bit harder. West Shore, Edgewood have time that they've still built out into their program. Some of the other schools are having, it's just more difficult.
Right.
So that's why we're trying to build in the trauma-informed practices in the school so that we're making sure that just even how we react throughout the day is a teachable moment in terms of SEL than otherwise. But in terms of the actual program, the actual instruction with curriculum, 81% of the schools that responded back to the survey said, yeah, we are doing it daily
Good.
or weekly. Sorry, they are doing it routinely.
No, that's great. And I just wanted to see where that number, because like I said, I know we've got it everywhere, but
Yeah.
what is this specific thing? So it's, that self-reported. The other thing that I would and this is more for, people who might be watching at home. I don't know how many people are watching, but when we have our, one of our academic excellence objectives involves, and A3 specifically talks about risk ratios for out-of-school suspension.
Right.
That's a hot button
Sure.
topic sometimes for the community. I just want to make sure that the community understands that we're not talking about arbitrarily reducing suspensions and putting quotas on principals and saying you cannot suspend more than X number of kids, but we're talking about implementing discipline strategies, mental health strategies, all this, even academic engagement strategies, so that will naturally, with the goal of naturally reducing suspensions, because we have engaged students who know how to communicate, and we have trained staff who
Right.
know how to interact best with them, so that number goes down. We're not talking about artificially creating a number. And I think sometimes the community is, they hear the articles and news
Right.
from other parts of the country and feel like we're doing it that way.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I really appreciate it. When we looked at our discipline plan, we were looking at a systemic, are we treating everybody fairly? Do we all have the same baseline for how we're going to teach discipline events? When we put in our behavior plan, which we're in our first year of, it was about giving everybody strategies, giving teachers strategies to deal with frustrations in the classroom, giving schools strategies to look at their culture, giving students strategies in order to manage their behavior better. So all of those programs that we are in the process of training, and it's part of the strategic plan, it's, we're looking at 3 to 5 years. Those are all meant to reduce the need for discipline. It's not about arbitrarily saying we're not going to suspend as many. We're hoping not as many walk into the assistant principal or dean's office. Now, that being said, we have a whole other side of that, and that is when we do have a high prevalence of risk ratio, meaning certain demographics are more likely than others to be suspended, whether we're talking about our African American students or our students with disabilities, that we're looking at systemically what's going on in the school. And we have a whole team that goes in and works with schools to look at where is the behavior happening. If it's happening at lunch, what can we put into, what intervention can we put into lunch in order to reduce the behavior? Again, we're not looking at saying you better stop suspending kids. We're looking deep at the behavior that's going on in those schools, figuring out what intervention might help prevent the behavior from happening in the first place. And as a result of that, we're going to reduce the likelihood that students are referred and thus suspended.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Right. And thank you for bringing that up, Ms. Campbell, because it is important. Dr. Mullins and I had some conversation around that at school visits last week, and happy to report that we had a great conversation with one of our schools that is looking at restorative practices, and teacher had a great example that had happened that morning, where typically those students probably would have ended up being suspended, but because they've been working on helping students to vocalize what's bothering them and making it okay for teachers and students to talk, and just have some good strategies in place for when there's an escalation in the classroom. And they were thrilled to share that these two students, who probably last year would have ended up suspended because of the situation, shook hands, apologized to each other, went on with their day without issue. And so that I think is the goal of the work that we're doing, is helping them to know how to express that frustration, so the frustration doesn't escalate to inappropriate behavior. So thank you for highlighting that. All right, anything else on strategic plan? Okay. Then the next item on the board workshop is on district accreditation. I'll turn over this portion to Jane Klein, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Leading and Learning. Ms. Klein.
Good afternoon, Board, and thank you for this opportunity for Marilyn Chappie and her team to share with us what's coming up next week. It is a very critical week in our accreditation process, but I have no fear. Russell Cheatham and Russell Brune know my only fear, and that is that the technology works well. Because we are going, instead of the accreditation team coming here, we're doing it all via Zoom. It will be a very scheduled out week, and Marilyn's going to share more with you. But before she presents, I have to give special kudos to Marilyn and to Jana and Lena for their work. Last week, Dr. Mullins sent me this panic text. I'll say panic. It was panic. That on Monday evening last week, Cognia notified us that they had a new process going in place January 1, and that was an additional student survey. Now, because Marilyn is so amazing in attention to detail, she had already received the email. She had already contacted and spoke with the president of Cognia about, hey, we're a week away from accreditation or 2 weeks away. We already have Youth Truth Survey occurring, and we can't do this. And she gave them great rationale, talked them through it, and they said, okay, you can do the Youth Truth as long as Lena does the work to align that to accreditation. But that's the quality of this team. And so when Dr. Mullins sent me that text, I was like, oh, that's old news. We're done. But it is a great team. And these ladies, and I know you've looked at the website that Janet has developed, and thanks to Russell Cheatham and his team for giving us access to all the links and helping us get that from the technology issues we had with the crashing of the server. So we've worked through a lot of that, and just every cabinet member, every director, every person in this organization who's worked to help us get to this point and get to next week. Actually, the first visits begin this week. So I'm going to turn it over to Marilyn to walk us through this presentation.
Thank you, Mrs. Klein, and I want to thank you for this wonderful opportunity also.
Is that sarcasm, Marilyn?
No, not at all. No. Not at all. You know, when she first said we're gonna put a team in charge of accreditation, I was like, okay, we can do this. Then when COVID started and it all went virtual, that was a whole new thing because all the notes from last time were all out the window, and we've kind of been building the ship as we've gone. But we have a great team, and everybody that we've reached out to district-wide has been so helpful. And most of all, I want to thank the schools who are having the visits. They have just been outstanding in doing everything that they've needed to do to prepare for this. So, first, we're going to start with just a little bit of an overview about some things that you've heard in the past. What is system accreditation? Well, we start with an internal review. That's the self-reflection that we do. What are our practices? And that ties back to what Robin was talking about as far as doing that self-reflection, that looking at our processes for a system of continual improvement. What are we doing? What data do we look at? And how do we use that data to make decisions? And then once we've made a decision, what do we do with that decision? Does it really do the things that we say are going to happen? Do they go into practice? And then do we monitor it? And do we make sure that those things that are working become embedded in our work as a continuing model of improvement? So we've been working on that internal review probably now for about the past year because we've been starting that, and our schools have been doing, looking at their standard, the Cognia standards, and they've been seeing what do their things in their school look like to match those standards. So we're getting ready for our external review next week. Like Mrs. Klein said, we actually have 2 schools that are getting their reviews this week. It'll be Ralph Williams Elementary and Vera High School. They are on Thursday, so they're very excited to be out there first to do theirs so they can be a help to all their peers later on. So what are the Cognia performance standards? We have the leadership capacity domain that has 11 standards under it, the learning capacity domain with 12 standards, and the resource capacity domain that has 8 standards. And each one of those is, again, focusing on the cycle of continuous improvement. And as you are interviewed, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit, that's kind of what you want to have running through your head is, what do we do to continually improve our processes and procedures here in Brevard County for our students? So we want to look at initiating and improving, and what is the impact of our work on our students. So the internal review, this is what our principals have been working on. Does the district use student data, observation, and survey data to determine their action, increase student achievement, and close achievement gaps? And yes, that's what we do through our strategic plan down to our school improvement plans. And that's what happens right down to the work that our students are doing in their classroom. And we have to show Cognia that we have evidence to support this. And the evidence is uploaded to the district web link that has designed, and she'll be sharing that with you in a few minutes. So that's been the internal review piece that we've been working on. So now Janet's going to come up and talk a little bit about some of the homework she gave you last time we met.
Hi, everyone. Good to see you all. Yes. So I wanted to address, in addition to the homework, which was to think of an example of impact in our district and how you knew it had an impact. And today, what I wanted to just draw your attention to was 2 specific leadership standards that specifically relate to the school board. And under leadership, they are standard 1.4 and 1.5. So 1.4 talks about the governing authority establishes and ensures adherence to policies that are designed to support system effectiveness. And one of the greatest things I found when I was looking for evidence was I think it's called the board member evaluation tool. And that is what I have put in there, the Cognia website evidence. But that board member evaluation tool addresses so much in these standards. And I'm going to show you how to access it if you need a fresh eyes on it before next week. But that was one of the things that Pam Escobar sent me as a great piece of evidence for this standard, along with the onboarding procedures we have in place for new school board members. And so those are 2 star pieces of evidence I see for this standard. And, I learned some great things, like we have a goal to evaluate 25 policies a year. Is that the right number, Ms. Bell? I think it's something like that. And in the board member evaluation, it says how we're doing toward that goal. So right there in that board member evaluation tool, that shows our continuous improvement process for so many things that are in the strategic plan as well. I thought they were very aligned. So that was a great thing. So that brings me to the other standard for you all, which is 1.5. The governing authority adheres to a code of ethics and functions within defined roles and responsibilities. And this, Mrs. Escobar sent me, I think, everyone's certificate of ethics training that you all have done. And so that is the starting place for great ethics. And I noticed there were some ethics questions in the board member evaluation tool as well. So I bring up these 2 standards because these, in addition to the strategic plan, these 2 standards might be where the Cognia team interviewing you all goes with their questions. Just these are the 2 specific standards that are geared toward school board members. So that's why I'm just bringing those to your attention, because in addition to knowing everything about the whole district, We just wanted to make sure that you had the appropriate tools. I wanted you to know what they were seeing about you. I know you know it, but I wanted you to know what we had put in a location for them to look at for you. And those are where I would steer you for those things. If anyone needs it, I will ask Mrs. Escobar to send you the link to our Cognia accreditation website that the Cognia team members will have access to. I'm going to go ahead and go there now just to show you, but it's a little cumbersome in the number of clicks, but just know that the Cognia team will not be clicking. They're going to have the link as well. So I get to it by department, for those of you watching at home. Departments and programs, and then school improvement, and then there's a Cognia button up at the top, and then where it says coming soon, it's no longer coming soon, it's here. And the links are under, at the top you see the 3 domains: leadership, learning, and resource capacity. And so under leadership is where you'll see 1.4 and 1.5, and you can see the evidence that has been placed there with regards to the governing authorities establishing and ensuring adherence to policies designed to support system effectiveness, and then 1.5 related to ethics and functions within defined roles and responsibilities. And anyway, you can see what evidence I've put there. Under 1.4, in addition to what I told you, you'll just see I've put some examples that cabinet members have sent me or that I discovered on my own of different policies and procedures, like our grading policy and procedure, our graduation requirement, our safe return to schools, especially with self-contained ESE classrooms, and anyway, some key policies, code of conduct, bullying policy, those types of things. And I don't really think that you all need to know the specifics of each of those policies. Your role is more about the system we have in place to evaluate and ensure our best policies are in place. That's more the role we're looking at, is the system in place we have to keep those policies aligned to what we do and keep our kids safe. So can I answer any questions for our school board members or superintendent about those specific standards or those slides?
Any questions?
Well, I do practice good wait time. So,
You know, I think that the evaluation tool is a good one, but we also have another document when you were talking about the roles of 1.5, the functions within defined roles and responsibilities. We have another document that we have as a board.
is it the
Communication.
board working guidelines?
Yes.
Yes.
I have that under 1.5.
Okay.
BPS school board working guidelines right there. Yep.
I'm on the wrong. Under 1.5.
Yes. Leadership.
And under on the right or the left?
On
I see it. I see it
on
on the
the left.
Yes. Thank you.
The second
I see
one
it.
down.
Good. As soon as you were saying that, I was like, we have another document that we really specifically get to that, so that'll be good for us to maybe. take a
Yes,
look
that
at
is
as
a
well.
good place to look. Thank you for bringing that up.
We'll figure it out.
And you know what? We don't have any way of knowing if they have time or what they will actually have an opportunity to look at. This is just us laying the groundwork for them. And by all means, if they don't bring up these great documents, that's your opportunity to just share what you know as our best practice here in alignment with those standards. They're not going, just so you know, the Cognia team is not going to reference these standards by number. They're just going to intuitively frame questions to solicit your input surrounding the standard. All right, well, thank you. And am I doing that?
Thank you, Janet. lead evaluator has assured me that he said, now, let everybody know that's being interviewed. That's not going to be just like interview questions fired back and forth like that. It's going to be more conversational. So it's going to be more of a conversation where they just talk to you about, good practices and what are we doing in our school district. Nothing to fear. So our schools that have been selected for virtual review team visits, we have 18 schools. Of our elementary schools, we have Atlantis Elementary, Bayview Elementary, Croton Elementary, Discovery Elementary, Gemini Elementary, Indy Atlantic Elementary, Longleaf Elementary, Mila Elementary, and Ralph Williams Elementary. So those schools are getting ready for their visit. And our middle and high schools, we have Cocoa High, O'Galley High, Edgewood Junior Senior, Andrew Jackson Middle, Thomas Jefferson Middle, Palm Bay Magnet High, Rockledge High School, Stone Magnet Middle, and Vera High School. So all of those principals, they have been on board with everything. They have met all the goals that they needed to meet to be ready. So they are all ready for their visits that are starting next week, with the exception of Ralph Williams and Vera High School, which are having their visits this week, starting on Thursday. So our big day here at the district level is Monday, January 25th. That's the day that I need to have on your calendars. And to make sure it's on your calendars, you're going to be receiving a calendar invite from me either later today or tomorrow that will have the Zoom link in it that you will have to open up on Monday for your interview. Okay? So what does Monday morning look like? It starts at 8:15 with our external review team logging in to meet with Dr. Mullins, and he's going to do a district overview, and his cabinet will be with him at the time that they do it. And then following Dr. Mullins' overview of our district and our practices, then the superintendent and the cabinet members will be doing a group interview. They'll all be on together for the Zoom interview to be interviewed by our team. Following that at 9:30 a.m., that's when our board members will be interviewed. That's when you will each go into now you're all receiving the same link, but you will be interviewed individually. Okay, because of sunshine law. So you'll all log into that link. You'll all go into a waiting room, and then the Cognia team will put you out into separate interview rooms, okay, into breakout rooms. So you will have separate and alone interviews. There's an hour scheduled for the interviews, but I've been assured that they will probably take no more than probably 30 minutes, 45 minutes max, but think about 30 minutes interview time, okay? So that'll be starting at 9:30 on Monday. Then at 10:30 a.m., we do our system leaders, which are instructional directors and selected other staff up here at BPS. They'll be doing group interviews, but because there's so many, they'll be put into breakout rooms by different groups, and will be divided into secondary and elementary. Then at 11:30, our system leaders that are our resource people. Those are our staff that are transportation, food services, those people that aren't directly instructional but support the work of our school. They will also receive a link to in a calendar invite for everyone. Then at 12:30, our external review team will take a break, and at 1:30, they will do their own work together online, but that does not involve any of us. And then at 2:30 p.m. on Monday, they will start interviewing all of the principals at the schools that are not receiving external review visits. So all of our principals at every school will be part of an interview. And those people that are not getting the visits are at 2:30. I have a little asterisk down here at the bottom to remind everyone, please make sure that the device you will be using for Monday has Zoom on it. We don't want to find out on Monday that Zoom isn't working. So we have till now on Monday to make sure everybody has Zoom in working order on their computer. Okay, January 21st is Thursday, then next Tuesday and Wednesday, that's our elementary school schedules in the morning, and our middle and high schools will be interviewed in the afternoon. You can see that the schedules for each school, they have 4 different groups being interviewed. Our schools have their school leadership team, teacher and staff interviews, student interviews and student polls, and then parent interviews. And each of our schools that has their visit coming have already submitted all the names of the people who are participating, and I want to thank all of the parents in our community who have agreed to do Zoom interviews to support their schools, all the students who are participating, all the teachers who are participating, especially during this year where we have so much going on, and they've all said, yes, I'll participate in this So I want to thank everybody for that. So our January 28th, next Thursday, that'll be the last day of our visit. The Accreditation External Review Team will present their exit report to Dr. Mullins virtually through Zoom on Thursday from 2:30 to 3:30. And final accreditation report will be sent to Dr. Mullins approximately 30 days following the review, and then that review will be presented to everyone at a later date. The final report will contain ratings and a narrative, and I will tell you already that our lead facilitator with Cognia has assured me, he said, Marilyn, you are already accredited. You're not going to lose your accreditation unless you do something terrible. No, he didn't say it quite like that. He said, you already are accredited. It's yours to lose. But no problem. Brevard Public Schools will retain their accreditation. So it's just a matter of looking at our processes and maybe offering some suggestions and things as we move forward. But he said just going through this process with us, he says he sees everything is going really well with Brevard Public Schools. So that takes a little bit of the stress off. We're already accredited. Okay. Our next steps, mark your calendars for Monday, January 25th. Like I said, I'll be sending you that calendar invite. The cabinet presentation interview begins at 8:15. Board member interviews will begin at 9:30 a.m. Thursday, January 28th, Dr. Mullins will receive the accreditation engagement review exit report. And you also have a calendar that I gave everybody, a schedule that looks like this. And it shows that on that final day, for the exit report that it'll be Dr. Mullins, his cabinet, and our board chair who will be with him to receive that. So Mrs. Belford, you will also be receiving a link to that meeting, okay? All right. Validation report will be sent from Cognia 30 days following the review. Make sure you have working Zoom account on your device for the interview. Are there any questions?
One question, and that is, I'm just curious, how was the parents?
Principals chose the parents. Yes, principals chose the parents. They chose their leadership team. They chose the students.
Jane probably knows why I asked that question.
Yeah. No, the principals chose everyone who is being interviewed for their school.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was a good question.
It was.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you so much, Marilyn, Janet, Lena, for all of your work on this and ensuring that we are all prepared and have all the tools we need to shine bright for Brevard. Appreciate
Mrs.
it.
Belford, if I may, just likely at the expense of echoing what's already been reflected, but I too want to express my appreciation of this team. Just to put into context, if you were on the board, I know Ms. Belford was 5 years ago when we went through district accreditation, there was a large team that was rallied to prepare for the accreditation almost a year in advance. I think 5 team leaders, and they went and gathered information and evidence and so on, similar process, but it was delegated and distributed across the entire organization. This round, these 3 impressive ladies have really carried the charge for this. The website that you saw, which was essentially developed 5 years ago, not in website form, but in notebook form, was done, distributed across the organization. Janet Stevenson essentially built that for us and put the evidence together, all to save pulling people off their core mission, which is already like ramped up exponentially given the environment that they've been in. So Janet, Lena, Marilyn, thank you for your tremendous and selfless leadership to support our team and to support our district administrators across the district, and also to this board. This evidence was not contrived. It existed, it was natural, it demonstrates ongoing engaged leadership and commitment to the organization of to the core mission. Every one of our cabinet members in their respective areas have done the work to demonstrate we are committed to this mission, and we're ready to demonstrate it and prepare for it, not the least of which are leading and learning assistant superintendents to demonstrate the work that we're doing to the core mission. So I wish I could say, it is without any angst that we go into district accreditation, but I say bring it. we're ready to demonstrate what the excellence we've committed to for the students at Brevard through the leadership that's already been demonstrated. And, it'll be like the night before the first day of school when we're a little anxious and, okay, how's it going to go? But nevertheless, we're ready, and thank you for your support and your preparation for the entire organization to get us there.
It's going to be great. You guys are going to do wonderful. And like I said, conversational. Just talk about the work that you do every day. That's all they want to hear. Just talk about the work you do. Okay? Thank you.
And if I could just add, Dr. Mullins, to your recognition of them, you mentioned that they took this on to avoid pulling other people off of core mission, but these three have not been pulled off of core mission work. So it's not like their only work during this time has been prep for accreditation. They've been doing that on top of all of their other responsibilities. So thank you. We appreciate you. All right, our last item on the workshop is on Mascot. General Counsel, Mr. Paul Gibbs, will lead this discussion. Mr. Gibbs.
Good afternoon. Right on the agenda packet, you'll see that there are 5 attachments, options 1 through 4, and an administrative procedure draft on there for Dr. Sullivan. I will thank Dr. Sullivan and Ms. Escobar, who came up with the procedures, and Mr. Susan, prior to Dr. Sullivan's draft coming in, had said he liked Ms. Escobar's draft when she did. So option 1 is a policy draft that we did. We just amended the policy 7250, commemoration of facilities, and added the mascot section to the bottom of it for school mascot. And I did forward all these, or I forwarded the first 3 last week, and then the last option 4 came in at the end of last week, so I forwarded that earlier today. So that's option 1. Option 2 is an administrative procedure. It is the exact same thing that is attached to the policy, only it is an administrative procedure instead of a separate board policy. So it would just be approved as an administrative procedure. Option 3 for the board's consideration is an administrative procedure that we blended, Ms. Escobar and Dr. Sullivan. So the pieces that were in Dr. Sullivan's that were not in Ms. Escobar's, we blended together so that they formed one administrative procedure. It's still an administrative, not board policy. And option 4, your consideration came in from Ms. Jenkins last week. She had called me and asked about doing something like the NCAA does, where they banned the use of offensive and derogatory team names. So they cannot show their insignia or anything at NCAA functions. And I looked into their guidelines, and we pulled from that and created this policy, which would work hand in hand with an administrative procedures and refers to the administrative procedures that we drafted, and specifically Dr. Sullivan's there. It would ban the use of any derogatory and or offensive school mascots and direct schools to fix their mascots so that they would be in line with it, and then they would follow the procedures. So it's a more generic policy. You can't have an offensive or derogatory mascot, and if you do, the board would direct you to change your mascot, unless, like for instance, in Indian, if you were the Seminoles, FSU has the Seminole tribe blessing to use Seminoles, so they get to keep using Seminole if they had that. So if we had a school name that had that, they could get the blessing of that tribe, and then say the board would then be able to consider whether or not they're going to allow that use. And if not, they go to the procedure and follow the procedure for changing their mascot. But those are the 4 options. I'm really just here to answer questions the board may have. This is a board-driven objective. So put it up on number 1, and you guys can walk me through what you guys have questions.
So before we get into individual options, does any board member have general questions, not specific to the individual options, but overview questions about what's been presented, or Mr. Susan?
First off, I want to say thank you, Mr. Gibbs, for putting this together. I know this was a large task, and I really appreciated Ms. Escobar stepping up. It's like a true policy that she's going to be coming forward with, so I really enjoyed that. One of the things that what I was looking at was thresholds. So one of the issues that we had was we have the application process and then a threshold that it actually goes over, right? Principal approval, something before that long litany of respond within 10 days, respond within 40, you know what I mean? To stop any kind of frivolous stuff just coming up. So I didn't see that application threshold giving the principal the ability to deny or approve the process moving forward. Did I miss it in all of them, or is that just, because the way it looked was it was just like you make the application, then they have to respond to you and everything else. Is that inside of there, you know?
There's the section, the school principal will provide a copy of the written request, and they'll go over that request with the individual.
And maybe we should just
yeah.
add in there that it gives the principal the ability to deny at that step any of the frivolous ones before it starts a process.
And in Dr. Sullivan's, they had the principal convenes a committee and to review the request within 45 days of the
just
written request. So.
I mean, I know I was the sponsor for the LGBT group, the football group, the whatever, and we would always come up with great ideas, right? And sometimes those, like a football team or a lacrosse team, like try to say, hey, we want to make this as our mascot, or we want to do something like that. There's got to be just a, nope, this doesn't follow anything. That was that threshold that I was looking for, if that makes sense to you. Or the ability to deny in there. That's all. When I was looking at it, you said in general. It has community committees, it has polling of student groups in one of them, and it has final board action in some of them. So they've all been addressed. It's just that one piece that I saw that maybe we need to add to it. That's all.
Okay.
There's the recommendation part there too in 3 there, where they have to, it'll be a recommendation that goes to the superintendent, who will then make an ultimate recommendation to the board.
Yeah, I didn't want somebody to grab a hold of it and use it as a vehicle to just start firing off. That's all. And if we give the principal the opportunity to deny it right there, that to me looks pretty good.
So, Mr. Gibbs, I think I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it. We have these down as option 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Right.
Do we have administrative procedures that do not have a policy driving them?
You can turn this into, option 2 is just you guys saying we just want a procedure, in which case it would drop out from here and go to the superintendent to approve and adopt.
So we can just
You
have
can
an
absolutely
administrative
just
procedure?
have a procedure, yes.
Okay.
So along with that, just making sure I'm understanding. So we can, even though currently 75,
7250.
7250, sorry, doesn't say anything about mascots, the administrative procedure that goes along with that.
I would probably, just for clarity, give it a different name in administrative procedures, a different number.
Okay.
We would just tell Neola we're doing a new one, and it would be whatever is closest to that, and then they would slap their number on it,
Okay.
which is what they typically do if we generate our own in-house.
Okay. So I guess my other general question is, 2 of our options, option 1 and option 4, are amending the policy. Options 2 and 3 are just
Administrative procedure.
administrative procedures that we can do without changing the policy, correct?
Yes.
And both option 1 and option 4 bring, if I'm reading them correctly, bring the ultimate vote for the mascot change before the board. Is that correct?
Number 1 does,
Number 3, I think,
Yeah.
missed it.
3 is the administrative. I'm just talking
Right.
about the policy.
3 is
changes.
just a procedure,
procedure.
yeah. So,
And
and
we
it was the same as Pam's, so it would be the same.
You can pretty much just say what you want.
Yeah.
One
With the blended
still
version.
says, from the beginning, I mean, option 4, which was the second policy option change, says the right to name schools, blah, blah, including school mascots and color, shall be reserved for the board.
That's, yeah, the official naming. The school mascot, I think, was at the bottom in section C. That's where we added the mascot stuff.
Right, but it does say mascots and colors in the board can then give that authority over through the rest of the policy, I guess, to whoever we put in the policy, but it does
Right,
say
yeah.
that. First
This
and
one was more, the board is going to determine, the whether it's derogatory or not, and then direct changing, in which case you would, and then it, like in there, it'll refer you to right there in the board approved administrative procedures, request to change school mascot. So that's where they would then convert over to the administrative procedure. So you would really, if you do 4, you would need to adopt an administrative, or the direct for an administrative procedure to be in place. So you would have 2 of these options with option 4.
Just if I may clarify, if option 4 would require an administrative procedure,
Yes.
but the administrative procedure would change to direct the school on how to select a new mascot, not necessarily determine if the existing was.
Right, yes. The board directs the change, and then
Right.
they undertake the administrative procedure that's in place.
Can I ask a question? So, Mr. Gibbs, I appreciate you doing this, and just so everyone understands where I came from with this, because this wasn't actually what my intention was. It wasn't necessarily to have a different policy, but that might be your advice based on what I had talked to you about. And so where this came from was looking at a list of all of our school mascots. We only have 3 that could be deemed offensive. 2 are Indian and 1 is Mohawk. And everything else is an animal or an aerospace, a symbol of some sort. And so when I was speaking with Mr. Gibbs, why I said I think it would be a really great idea for us to possibly discuss following the NCAA's procedure and what they did, they banned the use of the term Indian as well as tribes unless they had the support of that tribe, which he gave that example of FSU. They got the support of the Seminoles. So to me, I had reached out to Mr. Gibbs. I don't know exactly how that would be put in place, but I don't personally see the need for a policy unless that's your recommendation, when those are potentially our only mascots that could probably come to the table as being someone proposing it being changed because it's offensive. I mean, I guess someone can come out of the woodworks and be offended by a teddy bear, but I don't see that happening with our other mascots. So I just wanted to throw that out there, just because this is a lot of language changes for a policy that may not ever be enacted. So, again, I don't know if you thought this was the safest way to combat that versus then following a ban.
I mean, you wouldn't have to do a policy on it. The board could always just vote to say, hey, we want these schools to initiate, a change in their mascots over the next year or 2. This policy was more of a generic, you're not allowed to have. So even in future, for naming of schools, they would have to consider mascots that are, not derogatory or offensive to anyone. And that's where we aimed to try and just have a generic policy dealing with mascots in general. But again, you don't have to do that. You could simply, the board could say, right now we have these schools that we've identified as derogatory or offensive or potentially so, and then direct them over the next year or 2 to change their mascots according to the procedures put in place by the superintendent.
Ms. McDougall?
I like Ms. Jenkins' idea, and that's kind of what I was hoping. I'm not sure that we need a whole policy. I get concerned when I'm reading these policies that it appears that the board is going to choose from the 3 selections, like top 3 come to us or to the superintendent, and then we pick. I have a hard time with that. As a mascot is a community school unifier, and that's what we want in a mascot. And the part that I get concerned that the final say is going to come, the top 3 come to us and we pick. So I just going to put that out there. I have a concern with that. But I do like what Ms. Jenkins talked about what's offensive. And I will share with the board some things I took from Edgewood, because this is where it started, that I want to share with you. And I want you all to help me understand how this celebrates Native American Indian culture. And I'll pass those out. But I'm not so sure we need a board policy. And we're picking not only the mascot, but the color too. I don't know. I just think it's overstepping our role.
Thank you, Ms. McDougall. Mr. Susan?
I like where you're going, Ms. Jenkins. It brings us in line with some of the other things that we have. The issue that I might have is that, putting that who's culturally sensitive, doing all that opens us up for a little bit of risk for lawsuits and stuff like that over when we deem and when we don't deem and everything else. But I kind of, I like where you're going as far as making sure that we're representing the groups that we have. I think when I look at this, and I think we have a couple of things to go over. Policy versus procedure, right? Application threshold, community involvement, polling of groups, final board action. Those were the topics that I think, if we don't get bogged down into, which one of these, those are essentially given inside each one of these 4 options, and all we have to do is make a decision based on which one of these 4 options. But those are the main ideas. Do we want to give the principal the opportunity to block a threshold, an application? How much community involvement? And I loved they had a great community involvement in them. The polling of the different groups, the students, the teachers, the community, and then the final board action, which is, do we have the right to do it or do we want to? I think those are the systems that I think, instead of going from like one to the other to bounce back and forth, those are pretty much what we're looking at, right? So I like that they put all these out there, but if you wanted to try to drive home rather than bouncing all over the place, we could just follow, do we want a policy or procedure first, then move into each one of these topics, because that would be more, it would be easier to discuss, if that makes sense. Because we just say, I like 1B, I like 2C, and it just gets us all over the place.
So what I thought I would do, Mr. Susan, to help us progress through them is, first of all, just go through and ask each individual board member what their primary preference is. If we have, 5 people who think that number 1 is the best one, then we don't, we can then dig into number 1 and see if there are requests for edits. So Ms. Jenkins, I'll start with you since you're on that end. I'm guessing that you like number 4, but go ahead and.
No, I mean, honestly, I don't know how exactly we would go about this and what the appropriate legal method would be. But personally, I just feel like we're kind of hammering out stuff for things that may not even really be an issue. So I don't know how we could do this, but I think we should maybe ponder on possibly banning the use of the term Indian and Native American tribe with an allowance of a waiver if there was, a tribe locally that would be willing for us to use as a mascot. But other than that, when we're looking at the list of our schools, I don't see this being an issue. And so I feel like this is, again, a lot of language, a lot of procedure for really no reason.
So are you leaning toward not supporting any of them? Just addressing the banning of certain items and not looking at the process?
I'm with Ms. McDougall. I don't really think this needs to be a policy. I think if we go ahead and say that these mascots are offensive, and as a school system we no longer want them to represent our schools, then I guess maybe an administrative procedure similar to the one that was, present at Edgewood to help guide those additional 2 schools might be helpful. But again, I don't see this coming up, so I don't really know why we need a policy.
Okay, thank you.
So is that
Ms.
she
Campbell?
doesn't?
So if we're going through, I really don't like option 1 because I don't think ultimately it needs to come back to the board for a final approval. For lots of different reasons. One, I don't think, we make decisions for the entire district, but I do represent District 5 schools, and it's harder for me to connect with the community involvement of a school that is way up here and, in your district or your district. And so that makes it more difficult. And the board, we are representatives of our constituents, but we also can be swayed by loud voices sometimes who come before the board meeting. Honestly, what I really want to see out of this, and I think maybe a administrative procedure is necessary for even what you're saying, is so that when a principal is faced with a decision, and I think Mr. Susan talked about this, where do they go with that? We want to give them something, a tool, so that if someone comes up and says, we really want to change this, they're not left in the dark trying to figure out what I do. I think Ms. Ingrata did a fantastic job coming up with her, but she did have to, with the guidance of Dr. Sullivan, try to figure out, how are we going to do this? How are we going to involve the community? So I really think that I would support an administrative procedure. I'll have to go back and look between 2 and 3. what I want to do. I had seen those same other mascots, and that would be a separate vote if we wanted to have that discussion of removing. I did see, I think it was Hillsborough County just enacted something very similar a couple of years ago, or within the last 2 years, where they had gone ahead and asked those schools that had Native American names to go ahead and change their mascot names. And I think I can't remember what the board did have a policy that they enacted at some time or another in there. I think it had to do with, did y'all look that up?
I think it was a generic, you have to follow administrative procedures or something developed by the superintendent. They charged the superintendent with coming up with how they were going to go about doing it.
Right.
Can I follow
So,
her question?
That's where I'm sitting right here.
Everybody, I'll come to you. Ms. McDougall, do you have an option, a preferred option in the 4 options presented?
I really don't have a preferred option. I really don't have a policy. I don't think we need one. Not opposed to administrative procedures, but a policy I am opposed to.
Mr. Susan, I know that you have some questions, which I'll be happy to entertain momentarily, but do you mind if go ahead and share if you have a preference out of 1 to 4, and then I'll take an opportunity to weigh in, and then I'll open for your questions, okay?
Yeah, so I want to create a policy because I believe that if we are telling people that they should have to change their mascot, that we should tell them if it's appropriate, the one that they come back. I will also say that out of 1 through 3, and that's the reason is that each one of them has something inside of it. So like by saying option 1 doesn't give one thing, the option 2 doesn't. I mean, so if you're trying to look for a document to start working off of, that's one thing, or
And that's what I'm suggesting is which one are you mostly supportive of, and then we can get into the meat of it from there.
so we're going to pick one of these and then we're just going to pound away at different topics of it.
No, I'm just asking to try to get, I haven't said anything yet, so I'm just trying to get an idea of where we all are. Is it administrative procedure? Is it policy? Is it, obviously there are differences among them that we could easily incorporate into another one, but I'm just trying to get a feel of where we are as a team.
All right, so go with option 1 as the beginning for the argument and the request for a policy.
Okay. So, I prefer administrative procedure over a policy as well. One question that I do have, Mr. Gibbs, is typically administrative procedures are developed by the superintendent. So are we, by the board, we're not going to formally adopt an administrative procedure,
Nope.
right? So
Nope.
the superintendent is just going to take our wishes for an administrative procedure and then work from there.
Right.
Okay. All right, so Mr. Susan, you had some questions you wanted to ask?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about procedure versus policy. We've all given our opinion, so let's talk about it. I think that one of the things we're doing is by creating an administrative procedure that allows, and for the board members that haven't been here as long as Ms. Belford and I, there's a lot of procedures that just pop up and they go away, and we don't have any approval over them. So by putting this in policy, whatever it is that this group puts together, puts it into place so that they're forever, those administrative procedures are done. Administrative procedures are done all the time. We have situations like where all of a sudden we told all of the bounce houses that they could no longer be participating with our schools all of a sudden because we told in 2008 a group of cheerleaders that they couldn't use springboards. So it's just like it is a netherworld. And one of the reasons that we decided to start rolling through all the policies as much as we did was because there were so many procedures and policies out there that just hadn't aligned. And so by putting it in policy, it's solid and it has to take board action before it's taken care of. And I think that being the fact that we're about to go into this entire culture of changing mascots and names and everything else, I think that having a strong board policy puts us on better footing than an administrative procedure developed by staff. And I think that we as school board members, it is our responsibility to govern, and we represent our communities just the same. And so that if I am standing here and they're going to change a mascot in Viera, those are my voters. I go represent them, and I come back with a decision to make that's overall best for the district, but at the same time is best for that community. So that's why I feel very strongly about making a policy, because I think that per statutes, it's our duty. And I think that what we're about to get into, we want something very strong to be able to go through the process. That's it. That's me.
Any other board member want to weigh in before I move forward with trying to pare us down a bit? Ms. Jenkins, you look like you're...
Yeah, I just want to say something in response to that. I agree with you. We're going to have requests for school names to change, but that's a totally different topic because we're talking about mascots. And so it comes back to the fact that we have 3 offensive names that exist. That's it, just 3. And so if we just take an action to follow in the footsteps of other school districts, there's whole states that have bans on the term Indian and Native American tribes. I just feel like we nip it in the butt. We don't need a policy in place because we don't need to deal with that. It's a good thing for the community. It shows that we are forward thinking and gives us more time to worry about other things that are going to be coming to the table in the near future. And again, I don't know how we would do that. I don't think it needs to be a policy, but if we just say we need these mascots to change, I think I actually disagree with you, Mr. Susan. I think that it wouldn't open us up to lawsuits. I think it actually would just kind of close that out for us, and we won't have any issues anymore. Again, 3 schools in the entire district, one of which is trying to change one right. So leaves us with 2.
Can I follow?
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we're in 2 different realms. We're saying that we want to create a policy or an administrative procedure for mascots, but at the same time, we're bringing in this Indian name changing. So I think that there's 2 separate, because, you know, you may say that Indians or certain presidents or somebody may be offensive, and I may agree with you. But right now, I'm focused specifically on whether we need a policy or not to go through them. And so if you would have backed up 4 years ago and you would have asked this board, does there any mascots that are currently offensive? The entire board would have probably said no. So moving forward, there may be more situations where there's more situations where more people are going to want to change the names, and just having a policy in place gives us that hard, concrete way of doing it. And that's the reason. The whole Indian, the whole Native American, the whole presidents that had slaves, like, that's a whole nother argument. But what I'm talking about is the validity of us as a school board governing. And I think the strength comes from a policy over an administrative procedure. And that's what I think that's what I'm striving for. So I wanted to say, I'd like to separate the 2 arguments, because I see this, and I agree with you, Ms. McDougall, I see that. But I want to just put pause on that, and I want to be able to put a policy in place like we have for the naming of our schools, like we have for all the other things that we do. That's all.
I disagree. I don't think they are separate, because of the amount of schools that we have and the names in which that can be deemed offensive happen to all be Indian and tribal. And I would have to disagree with you. About 4 years ago, would we have said that? Yes, because the NCAA actually made this policy in 2005. So that was quite a long time ago. And a lot of places have been changing their policies and their procedures, and 2021 now. So again, I don't think they're separate. If there was all different types of mascots, you know, I agree with you, but because it's one specific thing, I think they go together, and I think we need to decide as a board whether or not we need to just address that and nip it, or put a procedure out there and just kind of let the community to decide.
Can I just jump in also? I know, Mr. Susan, in talking with Ms. Ingrata, because this is where it all started. There's no denying this is where it started. And it wasn't a political issue. When she first started there, that one of the first things people asked her is, when are you going to change the mascot? And she has waited and waited until it has come to a crescendo at this point. And what I passed out, Mr. Susan, to you all, is what has been in the yearbooks from the beginning of time until she got there. And so to me, I struggle with seeing how something like that embraces the Native American or honors the Native American Indian culture. So I agree, we have 3. I don't believe we need a policy.
Thank you, Ms. McDougall. Mr. Gibbs, a question, and I don't know who would be best to answer this question, actually. If we direct a school as a board that they need to change their mascot, who do we pay for that? I mean, there are costs associated, right, with that whole, with the
Right.
process, with the,
You would need to budget.
so we would have to budget for mascot change. So, Ms. Campbell, did you want to weigh in before
I just fundamentally, when Mr. Susan, if the board chooses to go the route of administrative procedure, it doesn't mean that we're not governing. It means that the board as a whole has chosen to govern in that way. So, and if we want to make it clear, we'd have to remember putting something into policy doesn't mean it's not changeable and that future boards won't change it. We revise policies all the time. But it is putting something more permanent in place. But, like I said, my goal is that we have steps outlined for our school leaders so that they cannot unilaterally make these kinds of changes. But I do appreciate, and I have had the same thought, Mr. Susan, of, our principals need to have a step somewhere. There need to be steps along the way so that every person who just wants to, not that our students would ever do this, but just, for the heck of it, let's give our principals more work to do, on a whim. And I think those are in there. There are some steps, including I can't remember if it was 2 or 3, included, having a conversation with the person who brought it up, try to get the why and the whatever. And then it might stop right there. It might go further. And there were several different places where it could, shut down, especially if it was, on a whim. So that's still where I am. Because I don't think the principal should be able to do that unilaterally. But at the same time, I also want to give them some help because I think for the most part, that's where they're going to be. Give us some help of how to walk down this road.
Thank you, Campbell.
Can I follow that?
Sure.
Thank you. So one of the reasons, and I just want to state it again, Ms. Campbell, so that I'm crystal clear on this. The reason for the policy is exactly what you said. If there's ever a change to that policy, it has to come before this board. The communities inside of this district have to come give public speaking to that point, and we have to go through a process and procedure to change that. Under the administrative procedures, it can be changed without us even knowing. And that's not to say Dr. Mullins or our staff's going to do that. In no way, I want to say that right now, I trust Dr. Mullins to the nth degree. But moving forward, administrative policies and procedures can change without input from the community, which is paramount to what we do here in the school district and what the point that I was trying to make. Thank you. That's all.
Well, how do you feel about option number 4, which is the policy that we have currently? I was just going back and forth trying to see the differences again, but that it makes it very clear for now and moving forward so that we don't have, future boards don't and schools don't come across this problem that the mascots have to align with our non-discrimination policies.
I think number 4 doesn't give the school board the authority to actually be the final decision maker.
Okay, so then we're getting to that's the thing. You want the school board to be the final decision maker. So, but it would be a policy that would meet what you're talking about, which is it says you're going to, if it doesn't meet with this, because the board has set this overall, goal that these what mascot should be. These are the goals and the characteristics. This is what needs to be something that brings people together and doesn't divide. All of that is listed in here, and then it directs them to the process in administrative procedure. So it still goes to administrative procedure, but it directs them that way. So it is still gives the outlines and the goals and sets the overall governance for that process to happen.
So let me, because I think that's a big sticking point from what I hear from the rest of you all. Mr. Susan would like for the board to make the final decision on a mascot. Ms. McDougall, it's my understanding based on discussion here today, you do not want to make a final decision on a mascot. Is that correct?
Correct.
Ms. Campbell, is that correct for you as well?
Yes.
Ms. Jenkins? Okay. So it looks like the board making a final decision on a mascot is going to be a deal breaker. So do you desire to push for a policy that would not include the board making a final decision on the mascot?
We need a policy period. So if it includes not getting in what I wanted just because I am the minority here, for sure. But we need to put something in place so that we can have a formal process. So if that means that I can't get the board approval at the end, then that's okay. Let's move forward with the policy. But if that's the premise to the first part of the argument.
Can I ask a question? Sure. I just want to say one last. Again, I just want to drive home. There are 3 schools that are offensive in our entire district. There are so many other things that I'd rather be talking about right now than this. I'm sorry for being blunt. I hear you, Mr. Susan. I understand the culture that we have right now and what we're probably going to face. To me, if we're going to spend time banging out language and having a conversation, we should really be talking about the renaming of schools, because we all know that's something that's probably going to happen in the near future. I don't think mascots are an issue. And again, I put it on the table. We have a way to stop it from being an issue. Yes, funding the changes would be a concern. I know that Edgewood basically has every single thing covered. We might be able to help the other schools facilitate how that could happen too. Or we can probably put a timeline on it, right, Mr. Gibbs, where it wouldn't have to happen right away.
Right, you could direct over the
Right.
next 3 years or set a deadline. These school mascots would need to be changed by this date.
Yeah. So again, I won't say it again, but I had to say it for one more final time. I just think there's a lot of effort on the part of our staff to work on something that probably will never come up again if we just get rid of the name Indian and tread.
Can I follow that?
Yes.
So I have an issue with you defining what is offensive and not offensive, with a specific reason by saying that the Indian and there are a million groups that could find offense to some of our mascots also. And I think that by you saying that the only ones in the district that are offensive that's not a fair statement to make, I don't feel, because there are other groups that have issues with other names in mascots inside of our school district. Okay. So by saying that these are the only ones, we just need to get rid of these and then everything's going to be okay. I think that I have a pause for that. I think that there are others that are going to come up, and I think rightfully so or wrongfully so, we needed a policy and procedure in place. And I disagree.
Can I ask which ones you think that is? Because when this came up at one of our board meetings, I specifically asked, how many times has this happened? And the answer was 0. So I think it's fair to assume at this point that the other ones have not been offensive to anyone. And again, yes, it is my opinion. I 1,000% agree with that. But Ms. Campbell had requested the list of the mascots too, and I believe you said today here that you feel the same way as well. I'm not trying to say that someone couldn't be offended by something else that's on that list. But if the point of this is to just try and mitigate, people being PC and people worrying about offending other people, I only see 3 things on there that could be offensive to somebody.
So it sounds like to me that you're kind of on the far end where you would just like to address that particular issue. You, Mr. Susan, would like a policy with a board decision. And I think that Ms. Campbell, Ms. McDougall, and myself are in the administrative procedure realm still. Is that where you are, or are you?
Yes, because I feel like when we're talking about the community having a voice, the closest community to the school and to the issue is going to be that school's community. Those teachers, those students, those parents having that conversation, and alumni and, all of that, having that conversation, and the administrative procedures that are in there, even if we have a policy, add into policy 7250, if there is a request for changing policy, for changing the mascot or the colors, whatever, we refer you to administrative procedures, because we want to make sure that that conversation happens. So, because they're in that community, whether it's SAC or whatever, committees that they have, they get the opportunity to have the voice, to have that conversation, and to have as much input as possible in that venue.
Can I follow that?
Yes.
So the scope of community is also, it's defined inside of our procedures or policy based upon who's going to choose that scope of community, right? So let's take, for instance, Edgewood, right? Since it's a topic of discussion. There are people that are inside that community that have gone to games, that have graduated kids through there, that are not alumni, but parents of alumni, who have paid the property taxes, who have been attached to that school for 30, 40, 50 years. They don't get represented in some of the small scope of what you were saying with the community of the students and everybody else, okay? We do. We represent the community. That's our job. Like, that's our number one paramount job, is to represent the community. And I think that when we say that the community is being represented, the own school was surveyed, and 63% of the kids said that they didn't want to change the mascot. But we moved forward anyway, because we wanted to continue. And some of the comments were where the kids haven't been educated enough, there wasn't some questions, however that works. But I'm saying that in some of these changes, as we're moving, we're continuing a small scope of individuals to make changes on a broader scope of the community, which we represent. And so by doing that, by creating this small scope of people who may decide to make a decision, and then along the way you see that the student body doesn't want to change it, that the community's in outrage, there's all these things, there's no process to stop it. And then in the end, we move forward with changing the name, and we just disrupted the entire area. I truly believe that this should be back to us in the end.
Mr. Susan, so I appreciate your passion. I think the whole point of this was to establish minimum expectations for stakeholder input, and I think we can certainly look at that if that's one of your issues with it. But it doesn't sound to me like we have board support for the board making a final decision. So my request would be that we move forward from that and see if we can nail down what it is we're trying to accomplish and where we can get everyone on the same page, so we can start whatever the format is that we're moving forward with. We can start identifying those things that may need to be added or excluded from that primary format. So I'm hearing that we have a majority support for an administrative procedure. Is there any board member opposed to us moving forward with the discussion of administrative procedure at this point? Okay.
I want a policy.
I understand. Thank you. So then the two administrative procedures that we have put forward are option 2 and option 3. Does any understanding that there may be different things that we need to address within them, and we can get to that, but can we get to consensus on either option 2 or option 3 as our primary support? Ms. Jenkins, can you weigh in?
I don't have a.
Okay, Ms. Campbell.
Mr. Hibbs, would you give us, without going back through the 3 pages that I read over the last, would you give us the big ticket summary between the 2 and 3, the difference?
Number 2 is the one that Ms. Escobar came up with, and they're really both similar. Number 3 is the blended version of the 2 with what Dr. Sullivan came up. We married the 2 on that, and that's the one that Dr. Sullivan proposed. It
looks like number 2 still comes where it brings it back to the board for approval. Is that step number 6?
Actually, in
yes,
A, it does as well.
So yeah, that would have to be amended if you want that out, or if that would be your choice. And then Dr. Sullivan's, if you just want to see what it was before it was married, and we can easily turn that into an administrative procedure if that's the version that everybody prefers. And it was drafted as an administrative procedure.
Right, but option 3 and that are pretty much the same.
Yeah, they're the same. That we just married the 2 documents, so there's not a whole lot of difference, except I think 3 might not go to the board.
Correct.
Yeah, it does not go to the board.
I believe it does in step 12.
Dr. Sullivan is raising her hand.
Doesn't,
We can't hear you.
My apologies. I did want to reference one difference in that is worthy of consideration for the board in terms of identifying what might be a new mascot. The one that was prepared separately included identification of a new mascot. The one that is a hybrid version simply identifies the decision to change a mascot. So just for the board's consideration, I thought that was worth pointing out.
Did all board members understand that?
And that represents what we currently do, right? What we just did with VR Elementary, the new school without a mascot.
Came to the board.
Okay.
Yeah,
It
so-
sounded familiar.
So in option 3, we don't address a new school mascot. We move forward with that being addressed as it is currently addressed without board direction.
But it comes before the board and information without consent, which I like.
Correct. Information, just
So we
no-
can
no
discuss it
vote.
in the meeting with public input, but we don't have the right to make a decision on it. Yes, better than nothing.
I have a question about number 3 as well. I don't know if I'm just reading it wrong, but when I read this, it feels like any request goes to the principal and then this process begins. There's no threshold. So I have a question. Do we feel like this puts a burden on our administration versus helping to guide them? Because this basically says now every request that comes through has to go through a process, which could be, an absolutely absurd request.
And that's what Mr. Susan was addressing. So I
Right.
think if we land that we have majority support for 3, I think that's a great thing that we need to address within it. Absolutely. So Ms. Campbell, we were weighing in 2 or 3 on administrative procedures, and then we can.
go board towards 3 if we wanted to just make it clear and add the new mascot procedures. We can
So we'll
can
get
throw
to
them
that.
in.
Ms. McDougall, 2 or 3?
do 3. But there was several places where it could be stopped. It's going to take a little time either way. But whether it's from the conversation with the principal or the initial committee doesn't ask to move it forward to SAC.
And we're going to we can add. Okay,
Once
just
we
checking.
find out where we're landing, we'll get into discussion on 3 specifically. Okay, Mr. Susan, 2 or 3, do you want to
3.
weigh in?
3.
Mr. Susan's weighing in on 3 as well. All right, so at this point, we will take a look at option number 3, and I am hearing that at least 2 board members have support for allowing the principal to deny establishment of a committee for discussion. Is that something that all board members would support? Ms. McDougall, you have not weighed in on that issue?
No, that makes perfect sense.
Ms.
absolutely.
Campbell?
Mhm.
So, Mr. Gibbs, could you please work into option 3 that a principal could not move forward to a committee decision? And then, do we as a board want to establish, keeping in mind that this is going to Dr. Mullins because it's an administrative procedure, so we are not technically drafting it, but do we want to establish some criteria? Do we just want to say the principal can say, nope, I'm not going to listen to you? Like where I know that's 2 extreme ends, right? But where do we want to fall?
If you're asking.
Dr. Mullins wants to weigh in, I believe.
Well, Ms. Belford, I would just ask that the board offer the opportunity for that to be included in the administrative procedure. Give me the opportunity to confer with staff, confer with principals, because in my mind, and we didn't talk about this perspective previously, principals may not want the discretion to just deny a request without specific guidelines of why it could be denied, because it could then be perceived that the principal was standing in the way of this being considered. So I appreciate the concern to give principals some authority and autonomy, but at the same time, I would appreciate the time and opportunity to confer and meet with them to ensure that they want that level of autonomy and authority, because it could create more conflict for them later on. So, and if we're going to go to the length to establish a procedure for this, I want to make sure that it is as reflective as it should be for our staff moving forward. Does that make sense?
Does any
And I-
board member have concern with that request?
I don't, but I think what might help us is if you go to the policy that talks about the NCAA, that language there about not derogatory, offensive, etc., that might be helpful to put into, that's just a
I
suggestion.
got one.
Yeah.
So let me just clarify, Ms. McDougall, what you're asking is to have that language, because this one puts together the names and the mascots and the colors, right, into this. So what you're asking is to have the language referencing the appropriateness of,
Right.
of mascots being incorporated into the administrative procedure without the board weighing in on the appropriateness. Is that correct?
I think,
Mr. Susan?
yeah, and I think we can get there in another way too. I think if we look at our already existing procedures that we have within the district, you can give the principal the threshold of allowing him to make the decision based on if it violates any of our already existing non-discrimination and all that stuff. That way,
That makes
because
sense.
once we start incorporating language from another governing entity, it starts getting a little hairy. But I think that with that
Makes sense.
said, that gives a little bit of background for Dr. Mullins to go to. We already have non-discrimination information inside of our district. We already have guidelines. We already have, and bringing something else in might throw a monkey wrench. So if the board, I would give the principal the opportunity to, based on current policies and procedures, if it violates in any way those discrimination statutes, that they can bring that forward, would be part of that threshold.
I think the language that Mr. Gibbs put in here, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gibbs, but I think you pulled it from our district's non-discrimination policy, correct?
I think we reference it. I don't
Okay.
know that it was a direct
There's just
quote.
that one line that references the non-discrimination.
Yeah,
policies.
it's,
I think we can-
mascots will not make reference towards a person or class of persons based on a protected class as defined in the district non-discrimination policy.
I think that piece right there. Yeah, I think we get into a quagmire if we start throwing monkey wrenches in there. Okay.
So are all board members okay with that request from Mr. Susan to incorporate that consideration of our non-discrimination policy into the administrative procedure? Dr. Mullins, you comfortable with that request?
Yeah, we'll certainly look at that. I'm not sure. This procedure is for changing the mascot, not selecting one, but are you saying in the selection of a new one, reference the non-discrimination?
In referencing the principal's discretion to allow the application to proceed to create a threshold, we give that principal the ability to deny that based or approve that in part based upon our non-discrimination policies and procedures. Does that make sense to you?
Well, okay, so I think I get where Dr. Mullins is going here. So the person who is requesting a change isn't necessarily bringing to the table a new mascot idea. They're just requesting a change. So technically, it kind of gets confusing because they may not bring something to the table that could be deemed offensive.
But I think I heard, and we haven't gotten there, but I think we have a board request to include new mascot selection into the administrative procedure. So perhaps it's the spirit of, it needs to be in violation of our non-discrimination policy or offensive to, before the principal will move forward with a change. Is that where you were going, Mr. Susan? Does that make sense, Dr. Mullins? Are you comfortable with that request?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there are other frivolous things that we might want to put a stop to. You know, if someone says, hey, I think we ought to be the blue bonnet or whatever, and, you know, do our principals have to stop every time somebody submits in writing, I think our new school mascot should be the blue bonnets? Do they have to convene a whole committee process?
Right.
to-
That's why we're saying they
you
can
know,
deny it.
I think that's what we're trying to say. We don't want them to have to do it every time somebody comes up with a great idea.
Yep.
Yeah, and I think
idea.
that's what Dr. Mullins is going to work with the principals on to get their input to see what's going to make their life
Right.
easiest. Short explanation, right? So I think I also heard requests that we have a consideration in this administrative procedure for the naming or the selection of a new mascot and new colors. Is that the request that I heard, Ms. Campbell?
Well, I don't know where when we have a new school, we just opened a brand new one, Ms. Klein. Is that written in our opening a new school procedures somewhere in there?
Yeah, there's a whole procedure that they followed.
Right. Is the mascot and the colors this part?
Yep.
Part of that? Okay. I mean, I know that they did that. They got community input, and it's, it doesn't need to be the same because they don't have a student body yet, but we can put it in there.
So, Ms. McDougall?
So, Ms. Klein, can I ask you, can you just walk me through the process of how Vieira Elementary chose their mascot and their colors? And so that's kind of where I wanted to stay. I want the students to be able to pick their own mascot with some choices and colors. And we know that the principals will disavow maybe some off-the-wall ones. I don't know what the right word is. But I agree, when you look at all of our mascots that are certainly there now, there really is only 3 that stand out. My favorite is the teddy bear. But anyhow, I just, I don't know if we need to have I'm just questioning about adding colors and masks. The colors makes me nervous, really.
I'm going through this process. I just keep thinking, are we solving a problem or are we creating a problem by doing this? I just feel like this is just not necessary. I mean, Mr. Gibbs, are we allowed to get your opinion about what you think is the best idea moving forward here? Again, we have 2 schools remaining that could very likely be a problem. And I just feel like we're doing things, not solving a problem.
I have no preference on which way is best or which way is not. It's really a board's preference. I believe I stated previously, I don't think we're open for liability, whether you do anything or you don't do anything, and you just let it go until there's enough uproar in the community to make a change. The board's
So I think, I certainly respect where you're coming from, Ms. Jenkins, and I would suggest that maybe we need to consider that a mascot change may not only come because something's offensive. A mascot change request may come because Lockheed Martin moves in down the road and the school wants to commemorate their support of the school, and so they want to change their mascot to a missile, or, you know what I mean? Like, I think there are other reasons that it may be there, and so I think having a procedure, like minimum expectations in place for someone to go into that discussion and to guide our principals, I think could be beneficial. Ms. Klein, are you raising your hand because you want to speak? Go right ahead. So I think perhaps it's, I understand where you're coming from with just the three. I can just see that potentially there's bigger application than just mascots that we're concerned about. But colors and mascots, I mean, I feel like that should be, like when South Lake reopened, Ms. Brockwell did a great job of seeking input from everyone in the community, students who were going to attend, even had the students draw their logo, and we voted on, the logo and that sort of thing. So I think that there's a pretty solid process in place for the new selection that our principals have always been really good about in my experience anyway.
Can I ask information?
Sure.
We keep talking about how Edgewood has changed their mascot. Last time I checked, the student body voted against it, and there's a process, and there's still a decision to be made by SAC, right? There hasn't already been a decision to change the mascot at Edgewood. There's just a process to see if they're going to.
Right.
The student body voted against it. Now the SAC, and they're meeting in the next couple of days to decide, right? I just want to clarify that.
Correct.
And
There's
can I
not
jump
changed
in
their
with, you
mascot.
keep saying that the student body voted against it. Let me get you real clear. It's a third, a third, a third. A third voted against it, a third voted for it, and a third didn't vote. Period.
So that's kind of like our election system too, where
Well, I can't
the
help
ones
it.
that did
But,
vote
so
and vote
anyhow, I'm
against.
just saying that it wasn't a clear majority of people voting against it. It was divided into thirds. So I just want to be on the record for
Ms.
that.
McDougal, our
And they
election.
haven't made the decision. You're absolutely right.
I'm
Counsel-
gonna,
let me
I'm
follow
going
that real
to,
quick.
hold on, I'm going to bring us back in. The point that we were discussing was, do we want to address the identification of new mascots and new school colors in this administrative procedure? Or do we want to leave it with just focusing on changing mascots and/or school colors? Ms. Jenkins?
I don't have a
Ms. Campbell?
I think it would be helpful while we're at it, just to include what we're already doing.
Okay. Ms. McDougal?
I don't really have a preference either, but it's fine to include it.
Either way. Mr. Susan?
New and change.
New and change. Okay. So, point of clarification, we don't currently require all of these things in the administrative procedure to take place when a school selects a new mascot and a new color.
Oh, no. Are you talking about, okay, I thought you were talking about just including that little part on option 2 that has just a new schools out of mascot, because all it asks there is to survey stakeholders, come up with top 3 choices, and then vote.
So, yes. So on that, but this says that the board will determine out of the top 3. So are you suggesting that the principal would determine out of the top 3, or they would vote?
Where are you? Where
on option 2, section A? Is that what you're
Okay.
talking about?
It says the top with friends who will then share with the board. Oh, okay. Final approval. I gotcha. No, I think we need to just, if they want to, if we want to add that in there, staff can write in what we are already doing.
Okay. So, Dr. Mullins, are you comfortable with that based on input from Ms. Klein and Dr. Sullivan as far as how new school colors and mascots are currently selected?
I believe it's reflective of our current policy. Is that, I'll confer with staff, and we can include it in the change to a school mascot.
Okay. Are all board members comfortable with that? Just basically referencing how it's currently done. Okay. Is there anything else that we need to consider for inclusion in option 3 that is not included elsewhere and has not already been discussed? Yes, Mr. Susan.
So I think, and I'm bouncing here, I'm looking at option 3, and what I'm reading is that there was one in there that had said that they would poll the parents, the students, and the staff, right? And I can't, and I apologize because I'm bouncing around here, but does that included inside of the administrative procedure number 3, anywhere in there?
Number 8, you're looking.
Yeah. Yeah, 8C.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Staff, parent, student, and public, parentheses, alumni and community surveys as deemed
Perfect.
necessary.
Now, the question is does that another threshold? Because we speak to the first piece being that, is this a frivolous request? We've worked through that. Next one is there should be a threshold that if the community, the teachers, the staff, and everybody say no, that it dies there too. Does that make sense to you? Because we're just polling them for information, but we're not actually taking that into consideration as part of the process for a final decision.
I mean, it's the information gathering period where they are supposed to look at the previous committee process, the review of the assistant superintendent and the superintendent's recommendation, plus the staff, parent, student, and public surveys. So are you suggesting that we put a hard and fast metric on that if a certain percentage of all of those go one way or the other?
I would just say if the survey did not pertain to be the majority of the people in favor of it, that it would die there. I just don't know if say that, let's just run this thing through. So we make a request, principal says yes, it starts going, and everybody votes against it. Are we still going to go through the whole process of all the next steps in the 90 days and going to the board and doing all that? Or are we just going to, I mean, does it die there? We have to give them direction that those are thresholds to break, if that makes sense.
So that's included once it's turned over to staff for them to do the survey.
So they do.
That is on this.
Yeah. So they do that surveying, but it's just kind of up to the SAC to take that into consideration, which now gives it, instead of a pluralistic view, which you guys were all speaking to, it now allows only a select few to make the decision on whether they will or will not. So what I would like to add in there is just like you guys said, let's poll them. Let's poll the teachers, the students, the faculty, and alumni, whatever's listed. And if there's not a majority, then don't move forward. I mean, would you agree with that?
I would just remind you that select few were elected by the school community.
Okay, Ms. Campbell, I'm trying to, on one hand, Ms. McDougall is saying that the percentage of the kids that voted wasn't a majority. And then if you know how a SAC is elected, that's extremely not majority, right? So that, I don't want to get into crosshairs and everything else, but the SAC is selected by a group of parents and stuff like that. I think that if you don't allow that to be part of the threshold, then you are not saying that the pluralistic view that you guys are looking at.
This actually says that they're not members of the SAC committee. It's a totally different committee.
Sure.
For the first committee.
Right.
Yeah, and then if it goes through that committee, it goes to the SAC committee for the 90 days. But Mr. Susan, what I would say is that SAC committee, so once those surveys are completed, the SAC has a public meeting and then they make a recommendation. So it's fairly late in the process. That recommendation then goes to our assistant superintendent of leading and learning and our assistant superintendent of student services, where they review that whole process and make sure that there's no concerns, and then they make a recommendation to the superintendent. So I would think that if those survey results came in very contradictory to what the recommendation was from the committee, that our team would likely raise concerns about that in their discussion with the superintendent.
I think we can set the intent of what we mean. So if we are not going to go to the scope like what I was saying as far as community big, and we are saying community small, then the intent, if we're going to say community, if we're going to say no, it should be the teachers, the staff, the faculty, whatever those pieces are that are defined, if that's the scope of the community that makes this decision, then I think that we give the intent as a school board that if it doesn't pass those pieces, that it doesn't become part of the process. I mean, I don't want to get to a point where you have a couple of SAC members that are on there that make the decision, it goes to the superintendent's office, and then it turns into this thing. I think the will of the people that are scoped by what you guys say should be the defining factor before it moves forward. If they get a majority and it's such a big issue, then yeah, let's do it. But if not, then we should not be engaging the SAC and the public and the superintendents and everybody, deputy superintendents. That was my point. And you guys had raised that as a big point earlier, is that you wanted to have the local people, not the school board, make the decision. So that's where the intent for what I just asked was. That's all.
So I hear you, Mr. Susan, but then I just think to myself, then why are we doing any of this? Why are we not just throwing it out there and taking a survey too? Again, I feel like, are we solving problems or are we creating problems? I think there's so many questions about, again, something that's probably never.
So right now, a student comes up and says, I want to change the mascot. They start the process of changing the mascot. It's deemed it's not deemed a majority of vote by all the groups, and it continues to go on. I mean, I just don't get that. And when we're saying we're putting together a policy, it's exactly what we're doing, because we're about to go through a couple of these, and we want to have something that's solid. And we don't want to look at our public and say, well, you guys voted, but you know what? Sorry, the majority of you voted to not do this, and now we're going to do it anyway. And the school board doesn't get to weigh in because you guys don't vote on it. It's going to be made a decision internally with the SAC committee and the deputy superintendent, and it gets more and more away from the representation of the people that are inside that school.
Ms. Kimball?
I would just say that this process is actually very similar to what we do on a very regular basis. And that is, we seek community input through surveys. For example, just last summer, our reopening plan, we had thousands and thousands, 13,000+ people weigh in and give their thoughts and opinions. And our reopening team took those recommendations, read through all of them, but in the end, it was not the public's vote. We said, okay, whichever decided we're gonna close, we're not gonna close, we're gonna do this mitigating measure, we're gonna not. It was up to the school board, and we took into account the thousands of emails that we got, the thousands of public commenters, the guidelines from the state. We did all that process, but ultimately we voted. I feel like we're putting the SAC in that same place, that the SAC look at all these things. They're going to have to listen to the public comment in the publicly noticed meeting. They're going to take an input, the thought of this person, and make a wise decision with the guidance of district staff. So they're taking all that into account. But I don't necessarily think we need to have it. Well, if it doesn't get a this much percentage vote, by the people who are actually paying attention to the process, then then we don't go forward. We're asking our SAC, who were elected by their school communities, to make a decision and to please include as much input as you can in your decision-making process.
I would point out as well that before it goes to SAC, it goes to secondary leading and learning and student services, and they say, yes, move it forward to SAC, or no, don't move it forward to SAC. And then it goes to SAC, and then SAC makes a recommendation, and then it goes back to them to say, yes, move it forward to the superintendent with a recommendation to support, or no, we don't recommend that. So, I mean, there are several stopgaps in there. And I get where you're coming from, Mr. Susan, but my concern is if we put a threshold in there, right, do we then encourage controlling of input? So, I mean, are we going to say you must survey 5,000 community members, 300, like you must get responses from that number of people in order for it to be considered valid? Or I feel like we're getting way into the weeds on determining. That gets really messy.
Well, 3 of the 4 that are referred to have a defined scope.
They do?
So your staff.
So every staff member has to respond to the survey?
If they choose to, they are given the opportunity to vote. Are you saying that we should not put it out to all the staff members?
No, I'm not. I'm just saying, are we going to require responses from all staff members? Or are we going to consider, if only 20% of the staff responds, that's a valid survey of the staff?
Well, I mean, I would venture back to what our political process is in the environment that we live in. 20 to 30% of the people only respond during primary voting season. So we accept the results of those votes. Why would we not accept the individuals that are passionate about this and bring forward their vote? It works in both favors.
So what do we do when we have a school or when we have a staff that says, only 20% of the people weighed in, but I didn't respond because I was busy trying to make my deadline for so-and-so, and I would really be against it. Do we take another vote?
That's the essential voting process. You come in, you're given the right to vote, you have the time and scope, you vote, you give your input, you're done, and it's recorded. If the majority of individuals at that school do not accept that they want a mascot change, I feel it should die there. I think that we start getting into the point where we're like, okay, only 60% of the people responded, or 70% of the people responded. That's not 100. But if the other ones did vote, then they would be in favor of changing the mascot, so we should just move forward.
And that really is my point, is it gets really messy. So
No, if you,
are we, just let me finish. So we've identified that staff has to be surveyed, and we've identified that students have to be surveyed, right?
Mhm.
We've identified that alumni and community members. So are we going to define how many alumni and community members have to be reached out to, or how many have to respond,
why don't we
or?
ask staff, since they came up with that piece, we can ask staff what they meant by community members. That's the scope that they came up with. I don't know what that, like, what does that mean? It's inside there that they're going to pull them. That's a great point. If we're going to put it in there that the community should be pulled, then alumni and community, what is community? You're right. If we've got to tell a principal to do it, let's talk about it.
May I interject, please?
Sure.
Ms. Belford, you're absolutely correct. This is messy. This is really messy. And I said it 1,000 times, and I'm going to say it again. I don't see the purpose behind this. Can I just ask my fellow board members to just weigh in, because I'm the only one who said this? And this wasn't a passion project of mine by any means. It's not why I'm saying this. I'm not the one who brought this up for discussion. But what are your thoughts on just banning the use of the word Indian and tribe? I know that you're saying that it could come up again, but again, it hasn't come up before. And so we're going to hammer out all these fine minutia details of something that may not happen. I don't see the point of this. And no one has weighed in on that, right? Because doing this doesn't take away the fact that we still have 2 other schools out there that are likely to come to the table and need this procedure.
With all due respect,
Hold
Ms.
on,
Jenkins.
hold on. Mr. Susan, are you in support of simply focusing on banning the?
No, I asked to bring forward a policy to
Okay.
stay within the scope. I didn't want to turn it into a debate over Indians and non-Indians. I wanted to move forward with a policy. Once we start bringing that in, we have a completely other discussion, which if we want to have that discussion, we can be prepared for and move through there. I think the idea is just to move forward with a policy so that we can blindly look at all options on the table.
Thank you. Ms. McDougall, are you in support of just focusing on banning Indians and
Yes.
tribes?
And I just want to clarify, we are not talking about a policy, we're talking about procedures. Is that correct?
So let me clarify the question, because I just want to make sure I understand.
Yes,
You want to move away from the administrative procedure and simply put a policy in place that says that we ban tribes and
That would work for me.
Ms. Campbell?
I think there needs to be administrators put in place because, like I said, don't want for the 2 reasons I said before. Don't want a principal to be able to unilaterally make that decision to change a mascot. In most cases, I'll share one tonight at the board meeting that I actually liked, that I don't think was done unilaterally, but which was our South ALC, their new mascot. But at the same time, I want to give them somewhere to go if this comes up. So I do think we need to have, because actually, Mr. Susan's not wrong. There are groups that have other mascots that we wouldn't imagine right now, but they would have a problem with. And if we've got somewhere for them to go. So as far as making the decision, it's such, it's just not an easy question, because it seems like it would be. It is such an emotional community, and I would like everybody to, I would like everybody in the community to think along the same way that I think. I think we all want everybody to think the same way we think, that if there are a group of people that we're offending, that we would do what is loving and say, you know what, a mascot's not worth offending you. But at the same time, have to recognize there are groups, actually Native American groups, that have said, don't keep getting rid of our mascots because you're wiping the memory of our, So they have a disagreement with the National Congress of American Indians. I said those letters incorrectly. I'm sorry, but so like I said, it's not quite that simple. But yes, I mean, ultimately, not giving this direction as a school board member, but yes, I think it would be better for our community to recognize that not placing any blame on the people who picked those mascots 50, 60 years ago or however long, but when we recognize today that people who wear that moniker of Mohawk or Indian are, that it hurts, that we would just do the loving thing, whatever our preference is. So if I'd rather motivate, encourage, and inspire people to make that decision rather than as right now as a board member lay it down. But I mean, did that answer your question? Probably not.
So just for point of clarification, Ms. Jenkins' request was that we move away from establishing the administrative procedures and just put something in place that bans Indians and tribes as mascots. So are you in favor of abandoning administrative procedure with the minimum expectations and moving to just the banning of Indians and tribes as mascots?
No, because if we do that, those schools that are going to change their mascots are going to need some guidelines. I still think I would like for the administrative procedure.
Okay. And I too believe that, some procedures in place would be a good thing. And I think that it's bigger than just, I don't disagree with you, Ms. Jenkins. But I do think that it's bigger than just addressing that issue. So I would support moving forward with our administrative procedure. So that would be, Mr. Susan, I know you want a policy, but you go for administrative procedure over a policy that focuses just on Indians and tribes. Is that correct? My understanding?
Yes, I don't want to talk Indians.
Okay.
If I could just jump in here real quick. And since the board is looking at administrative procedures, and that would be Dr. Mullins and the team, working on that, focusing on areas that everybody likes option 3 the board likes option 3 as a starting point, just directing, hey, we think like the discrimination language needs to be in there, and we would like to see something added along this lines or some thresholds added, and let the team go to work. And then instead of the board sitting here, I don't like that, I don't like this, I don't like that, and then the team can put their input into the administrative procedure and come back and update the board. Here's what we've got. Is this what everybody was thinking about?
Can I give Paul credit for standing there the whole time during this debate? You've done
You
a
can
great
always
job,
give
man.
Paul credit. So, Dr. Mullins, do you feel like you are clear on the overall wishes of the board, clear enough to move forward with developing an administrative procedure, or would you like clarity on thresholds? What is your comfort level?
No, the board is given direction to develop administrative procedures, and I'll try and do my best to summarize. Staff did come together and work with Mr. Gibbs, and I anticipate that when I go back to staff and we talk about option 3, that it is going to predominantly reflect my recommendation of an administrative procedure. It does cause me pause to start putting thresholds and quotas and so on in an administrative procedure when we need to give the autonomy to the local school community, if that's the intent of the board, to evaluate and determine if moving forward is appropriate, and we have a formal structure like the School Advisory Council to ultimately move the school in that direction, with some checkpoints to make sure that we're following procedurally, that we have a representative group, and so on. When we start talking about thresholds and majorities and minorities and so on, it does cause me pause in a process like this, because we're still talking about at least potentially 3 mascots that could be offensive. So we are avoiding that conversation as a board, so I won't go there either. But the reality is what constitutes offensive to enough school population? And I think we need to defer that to the process if that's the direction we're going, since that decision, the board is not prepared to make that decision. Does that make sense? So I think we're very close to what our position would be. I understand the request, the need for the non-discrimination reference, and we could certainly reference that moving forward. But if I'm not aligned with what the majority of the board is proposing, I would ask Board Chair that you provide clarification of what I've suggested.
I think that's an alignment, Mr. Susan.
Can I suggest one last addition, and that is that in the future, or we add in that it's our intent not to allow this to change until the discussion of the board has some discussion on it. Does that make sense to you? So we're going to allow it to be an administrative procedure. But many of you don't know, but years ago, when I was on the insurance committee and a series of other committees, we were looking at policies and procedures inside of our district that had gotten there with just one or two people. And that's not what's going to happen here. But there's instances where things change behind the scenes when the board doesn't have the authority. So what I would ask is if it's not a policy, I get it. If we're not able to vote on it, I'm in the minority. But at least in the event that we put it in the procedure, that if there's a change to the procedure, that it comes for discussion in front of the board. That's it.
Mr. Gibbs.
I don't know that you can require it. That since it's an administrative procedure, which is under the superintendent, the superintendent can certainly put in there that any change to a mascot comes to the board for
Communication,
discussion.
or
Yeah.
there's some kind of heads up or something.
But that would be, again, the discretion of the superintendent putting in his procedure.
So he's asking not that we be notified of mascot changes because.
Right. He wants that the procedure cannot change without board notice. I mean, that's outside the board's authority. It's the superintendent develop the procedures in line with board policy. So
I'm hearing that is
unless
not
you
our
want to
place.
adopt a policy that says all administrative procedures have to
good
have
grief.
notice.
Yes, yes, we should do that. Yes.
All right, I'm hearing from Paul that it is not within our purview to request that we be notified prior to administrative procedure changes. So unless I hear board overthrow on that issue, I think that we are good. Dr. Mullins, you good?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. I have no idea where there's. Okay. That was the last item on our board workshop agenda for today. Does anyone have anything else that they need to bring forward at this point? Hearing no further business, this meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.